The year was 1998, and Interplay had begun its march towards financial ruin. Bad investments and less than stellar returns had driven the publisher into a corner, causing the management to shove their developers into a dark room to produce art. Although the game was starting to be tinkered with a bit before Fallout 1 had even released, full production didn't start on Fallout 2 until 9 months before it shipped. Developers were snatched up from Planescape torment, and a hellish grind of non-stop crunch began as Interplay continued to race the clock of bankruptcy. To many, this kind of development cycle would likely spell disaster for an RPG with the amount of nuance and detail that the world of Fallout encompasses. And yet Fallout 2 went on to become one of the most highly regarded RPG experiences ever according to many publications, journalists, and reviewers around the world. I was still in high school when I discovered the Fallout series. With Fallout 3 being my introduction, a lot of the intricacies that Black Isle set up were lost on me until I went back and played the first 2 games. And what I ultimately discovered was that while I personally enjoy a more modern 3D aesthetic when it comes to exploration, the original 2 games brought a tantalizing amount of world building to the table that I couldn't help but appreciate and immerse myself in. Fallout 1 was a good start, but Fallout 2 was a great continuation and expansion on the themes, lore, and presentation of this post-apocalyptic world. That said, it's been about 10 years since I've taken the time to run through the second game again. So in this video, I'm going to be taking another look at Fallout 2 and exploring its story, mechanics, and choices while analyzing what the game did well and what could have been improved. Before I begin, I want to direct your attention to my brand spanking new merch shop with all of the good stuff you could ever dream of. Unless you dream of more than shirts, mugs, and stickers. And I'll also note that I have a sponsor with HelloFresh that will appear about, let's say 24% of the way through the video. So try not to be too alarmed. Alright, let's get to it. So Fallout 2 kicks off 80 years after the events of the first game. The introduction cinematic to set up this new era is easily my favorite of the series, beginning with a very lighthearted Vault-Tec movie whimsically describing what Vault Dwellers should do when it's time to leave the vault. After it wraps up, a group is seen going through the process of opening up a massive sealed door to the outside world. On the other side of this door, the Enclave awaits in their power armor, seemingly prepared to greet this makeshift family of dwellers. This is an absolutely fantastic way to immediately set the tone of this game. It invokes an emotional response from the viewer, and it instantly raises a multitude of questions about the world and how it's changed since the Vault Dwellers' days. Of course, all of this intrigue is going to be put on the back burner for a bit while you create your character and pull yourself through the tutorial. So let's start with the general optics of character creation. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here just because a lot of this stuff is similar or the same as Fallout 1, but I will at least paint some broad strokes while detailing what's different here. Right away, the game presents you with a few preset options which give you an average intelligence melee bruiser type, an average intelligence roguish type, and an above average intelligence charismatic type. While you can roll with or modify these characters to your liking, one of the best parts of these games to me is creating your own person and building them your way. That said, Fallout 2 actually brings quite a bit more potential for XP gains over the previous entry, so it's a lot easier to generalize your build by the end of the game rather than needing to commit to a specific playstyle. So while you can start off as an ace sniper, you can end up being an ace sniper who can switch to melee on the fly, take a sizable chunk of damage, and even do something outlandish like being able to comfortably talk to people. As always, the special stats make their appearance as the game's primary attributes. Strength, perception, and endurance are all about the same as they were before, with opportunities to improve them down the line. Charisma, on the other hand, is more important here than it was in Fallout 1, seeing as it directly affects the amount of followers which you can tote around with you at the same time. Basically, you get as many followers at one time as your charisma score divided by 2, rounded down. Though that said, charisma is still probably one of the objectively worst stats to max in this game just because it isn't super useful compared to a lot of the other stats beyond the follower boost. Intelligence is still broken in terms of having an easier game, and is definitely recommended to sink some points into for your first run of Fallout 2. But if you are looking to mix things up in a pretty drastic way, running a dumb character completely changes how you're perceived as it did previously. Agility affects your AP, so again, very useful like it was before. And finally, luck affects your crit rates as well as general dice rolls in the game, which makes it semi-important. I'll note that a lot of these assessments are biased more towards what would create an easier game for the player. or at least one where you get the opportunity to see as much as you can during your playthrough. But if you're someone who wants to roll with the high charisma, low intelligence brute who relies on their friends to take care of the baddies, that is something that you can pull off with the right planning. It's always been one of the most beautiful parts of an RPG, and it's something that I tend to sorely miss in a lot of modernized AAA role-playing games. Traits make another appearance as well, with the only real difference in choice being that Night Person has been swapped out for the sex appeal trait. That one's pretty self-explanatory in that you'll curry more favor with the opposite sex in exchange for being an annoying pissbag to members of the same sex. Fun fact, Night Person stuck around in the German version of the game specifically because apparently Germany of all places has an issue with your little on-screen pixels having a fat dump truck stapled to their hips. Either way, I decided to mirror my choices in the first game and stuck with the gifted and small frame traits, which I'll admit are top of the line that make for an easier game. I also one-shot Melania with the Bloodhound Fang and the Mimic tier, sue me. As far as skills go, most are nearly identical in terms of what they do from the first game to the second, with some minor tweaks to some of the math formulae behind their initial starting points. The outlier here is Outdoorsman, which goes from being completely useless on a high-luck character to being a relatively useful skill overall. Whereas before, the skill only affected the amount of damage that you'd take on bad luck encounters, the new and improved version outright increases your odds of getting special encounters while reducing the odds of getting into a regular encounter at all if you decide to pump the skill. Alright, let's get into this. So if you hadn't noticed the tiny description boxes of the preset characters, all of them mention that you're part of a tribe. This is the only Fallout game to not stick you into a vault immediately besides New Vegas, which really shows what the original devs had in mind with this series. The vaults are a big part of the world, sure, but they aren't the defining characteristic of it. To Black Isle, the need to start as a vault dweller really only had a place in the introduction of the series, and from then it was more about the world outside of these vaults. Bethesda did not get that memo. Either way, you're part of a tribe from the village of Arroyo, which was actually founded by the Vault Dweller from the first game when he was cast out by his own people in the aftermath of bringing the Master down. As things stand, the tribal village is dying due to poor land quality, wilting crops, deteriorating animal conditions, and so on. As the village elder's child and the descendant of the Vault Dweller, the Chosen One is sent to solve the tribe's issues by seeking out the Gecko or Garden of Eden creation kit. This item is a concept that Bethesda ran with in Fallout 3, which I'll talk about more when we get to that part of the game. For now, we have to prove ourselves worthy of undertaking this challenge by facing the infamous Temple of Trials. I'm gonna kick this off by including a snippet of an interview with Fallout creator Tim Kaine. Yeah, Interplay demanded a tutorial level out of the devs, and so it was crammed into the game very suddenly. As such, many consider it to be the worst part of Fallout 2, and honestly, after slogging through it, I kind of agree. The biggest issue with this whole thing is that it takes all of that good creativity from being able to build a character your way and just tramples it. If you happen to take a high-endurance melee build, this temple is a walk in the park. But as things stand, you're stranded in a temple with no other weapons besides your fists, a spear, and whatever pointy sticks that you can find throughout the area. Of course, there's also a solid metal doorway partway through this stone temple with a chunk of C4 nearby to blow it up for some reason. It's just really obvious that this whole place was more of an afterthought. And while it isn't a particularly lengthy stretch of the game, it also isn't a very fun introduction to have to push through. I will say that the final test at least does its best to create some alternate ways of completing the trial, which is definitely a sweeter note to end on. Basically, a tribesman has been sent ahead to fight you. He claims that it's not to the death, but what he means is that it isn't to the death for him. So you can basically patch yourself up and keep reloading with your shitty stats, or you have a couple of other options. One, you can pickpocket the guy for the key and just leave out the back behind him. Or two, you can talk your way out of the fight by convincing the guy that fighting each other could lead to an unfortunate accident. I believe you need to have tagged speech in order for that second one to work out. It's not the holy grail of alternate pathing, but it's not unwelcome after the temple turned out the way that it did. Either way, welcome to Arroyo. After making it through your trials, you're now assigned the aforementioned task of seeking out the Gecko from Vault 13. In terms of what's going on around the hometown itself, there's quite a lot more named NPCs than the earlier towns of Fallout 1. Random people who want certain things or have some knowledge to impart unto you, or just something to remark on. You can upgrade your melee and unarmed to a pretty decent percentage for no cost from a few of the village's men. You can stop by your aunt's house and nab some caps. Oh, it's not caps in this game. You can stop by your aunt's house and nab some money. There's a guy named after Fergus Urquhart who bitches about everything nonstop. It's just these little things that make the place feel a lot more alive than, say, Shady Sands. As such, there's quite a bit to do here if you have the right stats. You can sharpen up your spear by getting flint from your aunt who doesn't like you. You can take on some spore plants in the healer's garden, and then snatch up some roots and flowers to have him make you some healing powder after. You can rescue your cousin's dog out in the hunting grounds. And all of this can change based off of your stats and how you treat people. If you piss people off, they might rescind their request or just not give it to you. If you don't have the right stats, you might not get offered the training from the warriors in town. You can even choose speech options which has your guy getting upset with people and refusing to help them, which is something that doesn't really happen very frequently in modern games. It's a great introduction in terms of the RPG elements of Fallout 2, even if the town itself isn't amazing by any stretch of the imagination. So let's trek on over to a slightly bigger town with a little more character. Klamath is a rundown shithole, but it's definitely got more of the Fallout character to it. There's a town greeter who's just a drunk who tries to take advantage of your lack of knowledge and shake you down for some money. There are traders which range from scowling and permanently annoyed to charismatic and ready to sell. There's a house of skank where your guy can experience his first time with a lady of the night if you so choose. And while I won't run through every little interaction around these parts, it's safe to say that Klamath is a really good place to kick everything off. The dialogue options that you get to choose between range from someone who's never seen anything like this before in their life to someone who knows when a person is trying to take advantage of them or is acting out of the ordinary in this completely new setting. It gives you that option of choosing to play the role of a primitive tribe member or choosing to not let your guy get shaken down if you can help it. It's something that a lot of these older RPGs tended to do well, allowing you to balance and pick whether you want to play the game to win and succeed at all times, or allowing you to experience the story of someone who's living through brand new interactions with the lack of wisdom to fully comprehend them. I will say that for as good as Arroyo was about having a slew of named NPCs to chat with, Klamath kinda drops back into the normal shuffling nameless NPC ordeal. It's really not all that bad, but I did enjoy being able to talk to nearly everyone, even if that was because my guy grew up in that area. Still, there's a lot to do here in Klamath regardless. A herd of Brahmin to protect, a crashed Enclave vertibird to check out, a man who wants you to refill his alcohol still, a woman who wants you to rescue her fiancé, and most importantly, picking up Sulik. Sulik's our first companion of the game, and he immediately showcases the upgrades to the followers compared to the previous entry. He's fully voiced, has his own modeled dialogue box, and has a more compelling story than, "Hey, yeah, I'm looking to travel, wanna travel?" Now, Sulik is kind of an outlier here. A lot of the other NPCs later on do kind of follow the same trend of, "Oh yeah, I just wanna get out of here." But for Sulik to be the first one that you meet is definitely a good choice. I'm still going to skip on outright ranking the companions here just because they still aren't focused in a way that compares to, say, BioWare. But it's still worth mentioning that they have a lot more personality than Fallout 1's selection. As far as Sulik himself goes, he's a member of a tribe, which he left after his sister got captured by slavers. After tracking her down to the area around Klamath, Sulik was to meet a guy here who supposedly had her exact location. When he couldn't find this guy, Sulik got angry, decided to get blackout drunk, and wound up wrecking the inn here. Sulik was then forced to begrudgingly work off his debt at the inn from then on out, which I paid off to get him to join me. I'm kind of ballparking this info because a lot of the way Sulik talks is odd.
Slavers got our sis. Thought Vic be having information. Couldn't peep him. Got PO'd. Drank like a fish. Spirits of anger and chaos pop out and now we have to pay some coin to make it right.
But I'm pretty sure that I got this right, and thus our new companion joins me on my quest. To the west of the main area is Trapper Town, which is, where the trappers stay. There's only one guy to talk to here, who you can convince to give you the key to the northern part of this zone. Here you find piles and piles of rats, pig rats, and mole rats to fight. It's basically a dungeon which has a boss at the end in the form of this rat god which can talk. While part of me is resisting the urge to complain about the lack of zoom in and fluidity of moving from combat to combat, I did know what I was getting into. There are just these moments where the non-stop process of jumping into and out of combat gets agitating, and combing for tiny pixels of loot doesn't feel much better. Still, I will say that Klamath made me realize that Fallout 2 delivers a major asset to gaming that isn't seen very often nowadays: punishment. I know that might sound weird to some, but this game has a learning curve that you either roll with or you try to fight against. And it makes the knowledge that you gather lead to aha moments almost constantly. Here's a really good example. So I said that there was a guy who wanted me to refill his moonshine still for him. He gives me 1 day to complete this task before his alcohol goes bad. Well, in the exact same house, there's this lady whose fiance went off to some toxic caves and hasn't returned. In my rush to take on whatever was handed to me in any order, I forgot about the time limit and marched off to the toxic caves. Now, earlier in the rat tunnels, I wound up picking up a couple of pairs of boots. It didn't occur to me to see what they did. I just thought, yes, boots to sell. So I took them over to a shop and tried to sell them. They sold for a whopping $0. But I said to myself, well, these things are just dead weight, might as well chuck them. So I did. Now back to the aptly named toxic caves. There's this radioactive goop all over the place. Every time I step in it, it deals 2 damage to me. But there was this door with a locker, right? And I thought, well, okay, I'll save and I'll go see what's over there. And when I made it to the other side, the locker contained some meds and, well, boots. And that's when it clicked. Having the boots means that I take no damage from the goo on the ground, which is pretty much a requirement for this area at the time if I don't want to blind myself with healing powder to brute force my way through the caves. So after getting battered down to 1 HP, I decided, well, fuck it, I'll come back later after getting my boots back from the vendor, and then I trekked back to town. That's when I remembered the time limit. Yeah, Whiskey Bob here was not happy about my failure to uphold my end of our deal. My punishment here not only taught me a load of lessons all at once, it also decreased my reputation with the town, which affects a lot of little things. It again isn't something that you see too often in modern games, which give you 50 chances and ways out of any given scenario. And as frustrating as it was to go through, I actually wound up appreciating it immensely after realizing everything that I learned from it. But that's about it for Klamath. The whole town is definitely what you decide to make of it, with a few chances for deciding whether to help out or to actively hurt its citizens. It's not amazing by any means, but it's a pretty good starter town. Let's head further south to the Den. Though I described Klamath as a shithole, its shittiness pales in comparison when put side by side with the Den. Drug users litter the streets, slavers head up their operations here, even the children will pick your pocket as you walk by them. The only reason I knew about that last one was because the first time I played, I noticed that some of my inventory was missing and then I had to go look it up. There's actually quite a few fun interactions involving these thieves and what you can do with them. So killing them outright is fine if they steal from you, but you will wind up with the child killer reputation, which will all but stunt your game in terms of how people will treat you. You could have your followers kill them instead to prevent this, or you could drop some lit dynamite near them. You can also light the dynamite in your own pocket, and then walk by the kids in the hopes that they'll pickpocket it. What I personally like to do is pickpocket my items back from them and then proceed to punch them in the head. After the traumatic experience of getting their jaws knocked loose and having a man with a giant bone threaded through his nose chase them around with a sledgehammer, the kids will actually just run away from here on out at the sight of you. This is the kind of shit that I miss from RPGs. I just want to leave an impression on people that I interact with, even if that impression is absolute fear. One last thing about this whole thieving kids situation though. So in the EU version they removed kids, right? Something about being able to kill children just didn't sit well with European game law. But what's funny but also stupid is that the kids were still here. They were just invisible. So in the EU version, there was a chance that you'd walk by them and just lose an item, with no indication of what happened. Of course, it does appear in a shop later on, just because that's what the kids do with the items is sell them to the shopkeepers, but still, that had to be really annoying. In terms of what we can do here, the Den has a few craps tables at the casino, some gun and drug shops, a graveyard to defile graves in, and obviously the whole slaver business. You can actually choose to sell your companions to the slavers and become a slaver yourself. Of course, doing so is bad, but I mean, the options that you have as an evil character in this game are fantastic, and this is just one of many. You can also choose to kill all of the slavers and set their slaves free, though I'm nowhere near leveled or equipped enough to try that one out yet. Or so I thought. So marching in and striking the gun button to gun people with is not an option. But you know what is? Dynamite. So what I did was head to the main boss here, pickpocket him and steal his shotgun, plant a bundle of dynamite, lock the door so that the reinforcements couldn't get in, and then wait it out on the balcony. This made this fight a lot easier, as I could mop up the first room, heal, and then take on the second room. This also made picking up our second companion Vic a lot easier. Well, barring me going down one of the diplomatic routes, which was definitely available. The only reason that I highlighted this whole interaction was again to showcase just what you can do in this game. You're very much rewarded for experimenting and trying out more unorthodox methods to accomplish your goals. And I'm gonna try not to do this too much more just because it's gonna get old, but it does feel like a lot of more streamlined RPGs nowadays have a tendency to have very fixed methods of approaching a scenario. If you try experimenting, you'll often just slip into one of the preset methods, and that's all that you can do. If I were to compare how I felt with the slaver situation in Fallout 2, I'd say that a lot of it felt like Hitman in that I could stack the deck in my favor, approach how I wanted, and execute my plan. And it feels so much better than a lot of the typical, okay, he's level 10 and I'm level 5, I guess I'll come back later, that shows up in games nowadays. As far as Vic goes, he's a much more basic companion than old Sulik here. Basically, he's a trader who makes runs back and forth between Vault City and the rest of the wasteland. There are one or two other things to him that come up later, but the main thing is that he's actually the reason for the Chosen One ever gracing the wasteland with his presence in the manner that he does. Basically, he's been scooping up these Vault 13 canteens and selling them to various tribes around the wasteland, with Arroyo included. This meant that when Arroyo started to wither, the tribe's first thought shot over to Vic's stories about the vault and its miracle-performing Gex. It's a nice little addition to tie things together, even if Vic is relatively basic when it comes to who he is. While we're on the topic of companions, we might as well talk about the overhauls brought to the table with the second game. First off, you can actually set your companion behavior pretty handily with the combat behavior menu. This means that you can have them equip their best stuff if you want that, and choose how they use particular weapons or fight in general. Stuff like being more careful with burst weapons, the distance that they generally maintain in combat, whether they use melee or ranged weapons, and so on. Of course, some of this stuff is actually affected by their personalities. You won't be able to tell them to use healing if they're only hurt a little bit if they have more of a bold and brash personality. This is exactly what Fallout 1's idiotic AI needed, and while there are still some hitches with how they act in 2, the improvements here are night and day. Secondly, you no longer need to worry about being blocked by your followers, which extends to other NPCs as well. Basically, if they wall off a doorway with their body, you can just shove them in this game, which again is an awesome conclusion. Thirdly, you don't need to pickpocket them to move equipment around, as a dedicated trade menu exists along with the amount of weight that you're shifting denoted towards the bottom. All of this is exactly what the previous entry needed, and it's clear that the devs paid attention to what needed fixing from game to game. All of that said, the whole thing definitely isn't perfect by any means. Telling your companions to heal themselves has them complaining that they don't have enough stim packs even if they do, or they'll heal themselves for a very minor amount, and then you have to babysit their health to make sure that they're keeping themselves patched up. Additionally, though you can direct your people to not spray and pray near you, there's a good chance that they still will, and that they'll use the spray on a gun against enemies with very negligible health. The amount of times that I watched Cassidy just decide to unload on a rat would take up a 10-minute video in and of itself, which is really annoying when he chews through ammo like bubblegum. John, oh god, no, John, it's an egg, for fuck's sake! The last bits to mop up around the den include a handful of quests which range from collecting stuff from random NPCs for the bar owner at the start, to getting to the bottom of how one bar is selling booze for so much cheaper than the other, to starting a gang war between the East and West Side thugs, to delivering a meal to someone, to going on a ghost hunt. The gang war is actually something that I can't do now with how I approach things, seeing as the slavers need to be going for me to still interact with the thugs. It's not anything too special, but I do like that there's some replayability involved in the decision to just stroll in and turn a town upside down. Speaking of, the booze quest involves you noting that the prices in one bar for whiskey are much cheaper than the other. When you point this out to the more expensive bar, the owner has you investigate. In order to get to the back room of the cheap whiskey bar, you have to wait for the guard to move, and then you can head in and find out that the owner here has her own still. If you take a crowbar to it, you can dismantle it and permanently piss off the owner of this bar. Reporting back to the other bar has its owner giving you some cash and you getting the option to persuade him to buy directly from the other owner in order to reduce his costs and sell at a cheaper price overall. Again, on the surface, this is kind of a back and forth thing, but I love the realistic intrigue of it all. On the opposite end of the realism spectrum is the ghost hunt, which feels a bit out of place. Yeah, wasteland that's still irradiated, giant mutated creatures, ghouls, etc, etc. But for some reason the ghost feels out of place in this universe, I guess. There's just a straight up ghost that walks around this house at midnight, wailing about a lost locket. Evidence points towards a thug who took the locket, which the ghost gets excited about when you walk it back to her. Then she disappears and leaves a load of bones on the ground, which you can take and bury in the graveyard. It's an okay quest, it's just a little weird in what's been established as Fallout lore, I guess. All in all, the den is probably the first part of this game where I felt pretty immersed in how a Fallout town should be set up, though. There are these chem-abusing, mindless drones hovering between establishments. There's an east and west side which compete against each other in both gang outfits and bars. There are slavers which have the denizens under their thumb. There's a Brotherhood of Steel outpost with a guy who knows who you are and directs you to head towards the NCR's outpost, but won't talk any more to you. And to tie everything together, you have this kind woman who everyone in town loves who goes by Mom. She runs a small restaurant and keeps everyone fed, even making sure food gets delivered over to the car parts guy on the other side of town. It just feels like this real place that could exist under these circumstances. And the way that you approach it has you either going against the flow to free the people from the slavers or to join them and continue the cycle of misery. There's one last little bonus thing that I accidentally found out when I was messing around in the den. So when you're on the map selection for a town, you can choose between the different parts of it by using the keys on your keyboard. With the den, you can choose between one or two with east or west. Well, at one point I fat-fingered the 3 key and it actually loaded a sort of beta map. There's not much to do on it, though I imagine you could probably get away with just blasting people if you wanted to. And the only loot that I could find was a shovel, but it was still pretty neat. Our next destination that we can pick from on the map would be Vault City, where Vic hails from. On the way over though is the small farming community of Modoc, which we get right near the outskirts of before encountering what's basically a sort of cutscene involving the Enclave demanding that some farmers come with them. The farmers refuse to join this gigantic 12-foot tall metal man, and the Enclave proceeds to open them up like a can of olives, fingers in every hole. And then they just walk away. Alright, cool. Anyways, Modoc. So think of a very typical small town in the US Midwest or South. That's Modoc. Except, with two-headed cows and shit. The farming community is also suffering from drought like Arroyo is, meaning that the Brahmin butchering business is booming at the moment. Talking to people around town reveals that most of the traders here are pretty down about the town dying. There are some shenanigans to be had revolving around the various animal handlers, my favorite of which involves attempting to break the record for the most Brahmin fries eaten in one sitting. The challenge was to eat more than 36, which my guy does. Throughout the contest, the fries are described as round golf ball-sized deep-fried nuggets. Right around the 34th fry, my guy tries his best to not hurl and decides to ask how they make the fries. He gobbles down 3 more and goes for his 38th right as the woman behind the counter tells him that they chop off all 4 Brahmin testicles while they're still alive for the best flavor. Hey, I had to read that and so you get to listen to it. And although I got the meal for free for breaking the record, I wound up poisoned. Beyond this small amusement though, there's really not a lot of pressing matters to attend to. Just little things like clearing out some rats on a farm, fixing up a cow's broken leg, solving a dispute over a missing watch, helping a guy find his missing son, and blowing up the town shitter with dynamite, irreparably changing the map to be smeared with absolute piles of fecal chaos. Pretty ordinary quest stuff if you ask me. Rescuing the tanner's son is actually a side bit which has a bigger issue that Modoc has been facing, which is the fact that a ghost farm has seemingly popped up in the middle of nowhere. When a few citizens went to visit the thriving farm, no one seemed to live there, and yet all of the crops and livestock were being maintained. So one of Modoc's residents decided to move into it before disappearing. When some of the townsfolk went to investigate this matter, they stumbled upon rows of bodies dotting the farm, impaled on sharp stakes from the ground. Since then, no one's been back, which is where I come in. Investigating the area reveals that the bodies are fake, and the blood is of the Brahmin variety. After sliding down a trap door, it turns out that there have been people living underneath the ground here since right around the time that the bombs dropped. They're a peaceful bunch, and although their eyes and general constitution have adapted to the underground lifestyle that they lead, they do still need goods like medicine. So I take a message back to Modoc, which states that these people want to trade them much needed food and water, effectively saving the town from ruin. Oddly enough, that doesn't get me idolized with the town. I wonder if it's because I blew up the shitter, killed the town's egg-supplying Deathclaw, and repaired the town cow which just begins wandering into buildings at will. Nah, I probably just didn't do enough. Either way, the whole place is a fun little diversion from the main event of the game, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time in this region of the map. Before I roll on over to Vault City, let's take a moment to hop over to my sponsor for this video, HelloFresh. So every once in a while you meet someone who just can't cook for the life of them. I mean, not me, I'm a great chef. But sometimes I get lazy. Sometimes I just don't feel like trying to whip up a perfect 5-star meal and instead wind up opting for ordering food or popping something in the oven from the freezer. This is where HelloFresh comes in to mitigate some of my, less healthy choices. HelloFresh is the first carbon-neutral meal kit that offers pre-portioned ingredients for less prep time, while delivering fresh quality seasonal produce to your door. My personal favorite bit is the sheer variety and customization involved with the whole process, which makes it easy for me to swap out a particular side that I don't like for another, or just overhauling a vegetable dish to include something a bit more carnivorous. Cooking up meals is easy with step-by-step recipes, and the whole process saves me trips to the grocery store, saves me money from ordering takeout, and makes me feel like I eat a lot healthier overall without sacrificing flavor. Plus, I can pick out and sort foods by calories, which makes dieting a lot easier for me. So if any of this sounds like something you could get on board with, feel free to use my link or go to hellofresh.com and use code POGSALTSEPT16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes plus 3 surprise gifts. Thanks, guys. So now it's time for some real Fallout shit, as Vault City really feels like the first place in this game that's more serious and in your face. The music is this driving, thumping mechanical theme. There are armed guards everywhere, keeping people on the outskirts of Vault City under control. It just feels like you've really made it somewhere bigger for the first time, and this is only the outer walls, like I said. Likewise, this is where the game takes a turn in the equipment department. Before this, a good gun was a hunting rifle and an SMG. When I got an assault rifle and a special leather jacket from figuring out the ghost farm stuff, I felt like a king. And that feeling lasted for about 10 minutes as I ran over to Vault City and got into a few encounters which set me up with loads of new and better guns, armor, and items. I mean, we're talking about a trickle of small-time guns and armor to a flood of medium to big-time guns and armor. It actually feels surprisingly unbalanced, as the game just goes, alright, here's most of the small gun shit, get ready for energy weapons and big guns next. I know it sounds silly to complain about upgrades, but I guess it was just the sheer amount of them. Though at the same time, I guess it lends that much more impact to Vault City as a destination in the game. So after dropping off Vic and arming myself to the teeth, I pick up Cassidy. John Cassidy is a tough old man who had to settle down here due to his heart condition. Since settling, the guy has more or less hated his time in Vault City, meaning that he jumps at the chance of getting on the road again, which again kind of harkens back to how Fallout 1 companions functioned. Hey, you want to get out of here? Oh, okay, let's go. He is probably the most fleshed out companion so far just due to his background and the random quips that he throws out. I mean, Sulik had his sister thing happening, but that led to a dead end when we confronted the slavers, and it hasn't been mentioned since. Which is weird because it's like a driving force to his character, or so I thought. I guess it also helps that John's story was continued a bit through his daughter in New Vegas, but I can't really count that too much when looking at just this game. It is worth mentioning that Vic has a daughter here, and there's a bit of back and forth between the two that reveals that the guy is a deadbeat dad, but that's really about as far as he goes personality-wise. The city itself isn't a very nice place despite appearances. The entire area is under heavy lockdown, with the courtyard filled with people who aren't allowed in the city. Those who are allowed are citizens of the city or people who have a day pass, which appropriately only allows you to be in the city during the day. You can't bring any drugs or real alcohol into the city, as all of the town's booze is synthetic in nature. If you're not a citizen and don't have a day pass, the only way of getting in is by submitting yourself to servitude under the city's rules. It's just kind of this daunting, isolated, rule-heavy city. But its success can be attributed to these rules, even if they are a bit harsh compared to the rest of the wasteland that we've seen so far. The citizens themselves tend to be pompous, though generally still a bit more helpful than you would expect. There's a bar, some shops, an office to sell your friends and loved ones into eternal slavery under a futuristic regime, a repair place, a library of sorts which is currently transcribing all of the books around here into a digital format, and so on. It's all stuff that you can access to a degree, but need to be a citizen to take full advantage of. So how does one become a citizen? Well, you can pass a ridiculously tough exam which requires 9+ perception, luck, and intelligence with no physical mutations from your travels. Or you can head over to the First Citizen and promise to take care of some ghouls which have been polluting the drinking water up in the small town of Gecko. My stats are good, but they aren't that good, so the whole Gecko thing will be my route here. I'll hold off on the Vault City summary for now since there's actually more to this place after becoming a real human being in the eyes of the illustrious Vault people. I will say that there's some interesting back and forth with the First Citizen here though. She's not too keen on believing your story at first, but backs down after you convince her to look at your vault suit and canteen. When she buys the story that you're a vault dweller from Vault 13, she immediately feels bad for you for having been out in the wastes. But that doesn't go far enough for her to actually welcome you into the ranks of the city proper. It's a little infuriating the way that some of the townspeople here treat you, but it's definitely supposed to feel that way. I think an evil playthrough is in order sometime. Gecko itself is the polar opposite of Vault City. Where VC is large, sprawling, and led by arrogant leaders who gatekeep their precious city away from the unwashed masses, Gecko is a small and shitty hub of ghouls led by a familiar face in the form of Harold from the last game.
Who'd have thought I'd be making things right?
The old ghoul's done his best to keep the place under control, but as he puts it, there's only so much that he can do with the general intelligence of the ghouls that he leads. The whole area is situated around an old leaking atomic power plant, which Harold needs repaired to patch the leak and keep things going. Fortunately, this part is located within Vault City, so that should be an easy fix for both parties involved. Unfortunately, the lady who I received this quest from despises the ghouls and wants me to take care of the issue by wiping them off the map, which doesn't solve the problem seeing as the power plant is leaking contaminants into the water. It doesn't matter how respectfully you phrase the argument here. If you try to help Lynette here to see reason, she bans you from Vault City.
I've had enough of your foolishness. You are no longer permitted inside Vault City. My guards will escort you to the front gate.
So yeah, after reloading my save, I take the issue over her head to her superior, who doesn't give a shit if there's ghouls around, he just wants the actual problem solved. He has me pick up the part needed to keep the plant chugging and promises me citizenship regardless of any protest from Lynette, meaning that I don't need to run in and wipe Gecko off the map. I mean, I could do that, but I won't. So waltzing into the reactor presents us with quite a few options with 2 or so results. We can repair the thing or we can blow it up. Actually, we can repair it and then blow it up for that sweet experience gain. To do any of this, I can have a couple of different dipshit ghouls walk in and turn off the coolant if I want to create a crater. I can also head in myself to either save or kill the plant, though I'd wind up looking like one of those glow-in-the-dark ceiling stickers that kids have in their bedroom afterwards. But the smartest thing here is to pilot the robot, which has seen better days. To even get the thing running, I have to input a sequence of random alphanumeric characters, though it is easy once you figure out that you're just looking for strings with A, then B, then C. Then you have to do a little trial and error logic puzzle which has you seeing what the robot does when you assign it a task, and then inputting the correct sequence of actions before executing the command that you want. But there's also a fun part. So there's a secondary boot up option which has your guy noticing that there's a network linked to this computer. If you apply the same logic as before, you'll notice that there's an X, Y, and Z this time around. The end result has a conversation happening with this fella from the Enclave.
This is Enclave Maincom. But you should know that. Who are you? Chosen one, huh? Well, pardon me for not blowing sunshine up your ass, but I'm a little too busy for this, Your Highness. Oh, you a wise guy, huh? Look, I'm tracing you right now, pal. We'll see how smart you feel with internal security all over your freaking ass. Dickhead. A few more moments and I'll have your sorry ass in a sling. Hey, wait a minute. This can't be right. I've got you somewhere on the mainland. Well, whoever you are, I just dispatched a Verdi assault team to your location. Have a nice day.
That one was actually new to me since I don't think I noticed this option before when I played. After the reactor excursion, you can choose to take a very back and forth kind of route between Gecko and Vault City a couple of times in order to optimize the power plant and get it running at full capacity so that Vault City can continue to expand. This doesn't do a lot beyond netting another chunk of experience and affecting the ending, but the whole thing is a little aggravating with how much running there is. I think the only thing that would have solved this was the ability to fast travel from the map portion to the head office and the actual vault parts of Vault City. But that doesn't seem to be an option here. Returning to Harold has him clapping you on the back and thanking you, but I definitely recall gaining some stim packs from him for the effort. For some reason his dialogue is quite buggy for me this time around though, as responding to him with certain prompts seems to have him regressing back into older dialogue, which was really weird. There are quite a lot of bugs in this game, and although this is the only moderate one which has hit me so far, I've definitely encountered quite a few minor ones in the past. You can't really fault the devs too much with that though, they kinda shipped this game quickly. As far as what I can do now with my shiny new citizenship, the main thing for me personally is how people treat me now. I know that kinda seems unimportant, but with a game like Fallout, immersion is everything. And it does feel good to be accepted, if only because I have a slip of paper that says that I'm acceptable. Beyond that though, I can now purchase a lot more than I could before, and gain access to the vault itself where the main computer is. The place is a copy-paste of the vaults in the previous game, but there's nothing wrong with that. Heading down to the bottom has me updating my Pip-Boy map, finding out info about Vault 15, and learning about how Vault City was the recipient of a metric fuck-ton of water chips when a shipping error caused them to veer from their much-needed application at Vault 13. But either way, this is about it for these areas of the game for now. While there aren't a ton of actual quests involved with Vault City, the concept of it alone makes it have a strong place in this game. The way that it's ran, how selective the town is with potential new candidates for citizenship, and the mesh of helpful merchants and pompous pricks makes for a tricky time navigating through the city. The main quest with Gecko only further showcases what kind of people run the place, as you have one side wanting its destruction despite the town showing no aggression, and the other side just wanting the real issue taken care of. Gecko on the other hand is a rundown shithole, sure, but Harold is always nice to talk to, if hard to look at. Plus the ghoul bartender taught me how to play the universe's equivalent of Magic the Gathering called Tragic the Garnering, which comes with a slew of references about Black Lotus equivalents, addiction to the game, and so on. I mean, come on, how could I hate this place after that? So now that the game has been split wide open, I have a good 4 or 5 new locations to select from on the overworld. I typically save the NCR in New Reno for close to the endgame, but I do have a quest to pop by the NCR for the guards in Vault City. Partway through, I stumbled upon a raider camp, tried to take them on, got my cheeks clapped, and decided to bounce. Then I remembered something important. There's a car guy at the den, and I got the parts needed to repair and purchase the car from him. This completely changes how slow slogging from one part of the map to the other is, and makes my return trip back to the south take about 1/10 of the time that it took me to get to the den. Of course, pretty much everything in this game is south as far as the mid to late game goes, so I decided that I would hit Redding on the way back down to my next destination, which I usually reserve for after Broken Hills. Both Redding and Broken Hills are mining communities, each specializing in their own form of ore extraction and supply. As such, I'm just going to cover both in one go and save some time. So strolling into Redding immediately reveals a casino, and right next to that, a bar. I think you might be starting to see a pattern here at this stage. The citizens here are pretty much all addicted to Jet, and even the few that aren't waste their lives away in the mines, at the casino, or at the bar. You can mop up a few side quests for the sheriff here, like evicting a tenant, breaking up a bar fight, getting to the bottom of who cut up a prostitute's face, and taking out some gangsters. This is the best introduction to the town, seeing as you quickly learn about the 2 mining outfits who are at odds with each other, the gold that they mine being clamped down by the big 3 cities of the game, and the corrupt way that this town is handled by its mayor. Both Redding and Broken Hills trade with the NCR, Vault City, and New Reno regularly, all 3 of which want to seize full control of the mining towns. But the big thing to do in Redding is to buy the deed to an abandoned mine and clear it out in order to flip it for profit. The enemies here are ones that haven't shown themselves in any other game, known as Wanamingos. These are these very off-putting, alien-looking creatures with long tendrils for arms, no discernible eyes, and large maws. The fun part is that they're later referred to as aliens in other parts of this game, which is naturally what one thinks of when looking at them. But the reality is that they were created in a lab as tools of war before they escaped, much like Deathclaws. While they haven't appeared in their living form in any other Fallout, Bethesda did plan on including them in Fallout 3 before they were cut, and then they later tossed in a Wanamingo plushie in 276. Now Broken Hills is much more put together. Actually, it may be the best looking place outside of Vault City in terms of its rigid structure and relatively clean streets. It's also dreadfully boring. There's a big ass yard with would-be caravan runners milling around it. I was desperately tapped for shotgun ammo after the Wanamingos, so I pickpocketed a load of it off of them. Surprisingly, I got caught about 3 or 4 times with a sneak of 20% and a steal of 25%, so I don't know what that's about. Beyond the yard and the caravan people, there's a few houses, a doctor, a store, and a small pub. Very normal, nothing special going on. But then there's Marcus, and he single-handedly makes Broken Hills worth visiting. So Marcus is this very even-keeled, calm and collected super mutant. He's created a community of mixed mutants, ghouls, and humans here, claiming that the days where super mutants and humans were at each other's throats are long over. He himself established this town alongside his human best friend who started out as a Brotherhood of Steel paladin. After the two fought each other for a while, both realized how pointless the fighting was, and decided to journey with each other while discussing the Master and the Brotherhood's philosophies. It's a great background story that really shows what exactly Black Isle had in mind with the vision of the super mutants. They were these big, ugly, powerful enemies of humanity. They were led around by the nose by their master, and now with the master gone, they've had to go on to do whatever it is they could with the remainder of their time. I took this line of thought a lot further in my Fallout 1 video, but man, Bethesda really did just go, oh, super mutants? Yeah, those guys should always be 100% evil monsters besides a couple of them. It's such a tired concept to keep them as mindless monsters, even if you do invent lore that makes the East Coast species different from the West Coast. Maybe when Fallout Kansas drops, we'll see the two meet in the middle. Either way, Marcus is available as a companion if you take care of some questing around town first. It is worth noting that he actually recognizes my robes as the same kind that the Master's worshippers wore, which I picked up from a man on a bridge earlier. I'll talk about that interaction in a bit. For now, the east side of Broken Hills is definitely a bit more interesting at the very least. You got a guy who's worried about his missing wife, a scientist who worked on mass-producing mentats and has created a talking plant and a smart scorpion, and a ghoul who wants you to get him a porn magazine, a sex doll, and some alcohol in exchange for treasure. The treasure is 10,000 bottle caps, which are actually worthless in Fallout 2, funnily enough. Since the NCR minted actual currency, that's been the norm for a while, meaning that bottle caps are just junk now. It's again another concept that points towards the idea that the developers wanted the wasteland to grow and evolve, to change and rebuild. And it sucks that every Fallout after this has kind of regressed in that growth beyond New Vegas. The main quests of Broken Hills have you fixing the mine's air purifier and getting to the bottom of the conspiracy against the super mutants. One of the town's merchants is heading up a rebellion against the mutants. Not that they're really keeping anyone down, he just doesn't like them. Marcus, being the cool-headed mayor that he is, wants to get evidence before taking any action. Unfortunately for that plan, one of the super mutants who was scared for his life decided to kill off quite a few humans who were meeting and plotting to kill the mutants. When you figure this out, you can confront the mutant who atones for his sins by leaving, while stating that he only acted in self-defense. If you want to, you can join the humans in driving off the super mutants by destroying the mine's air purifier after fixing it. But you can also report back to Marcus and have the whole band of humans thrown into jail. It's a staunch difference between the idealistic picture that Marcus painted about the community being a group of mismatched species that still get along despite everything. And it's a healthy dose of reality for Marcus himself, who's been struggling to come to terms that his human best friend may have been one of the few humans who made coexistence worth it. The two mining towns of the game are yin and yang in appearance, though the more insidious nature of humanity lies within and comes out in Broken Hills. While things appear to be orderly and peaceful on the surface, the mixed community isn't without its rampant speciesism boiling just beneath the surface. Redding, on the other hand, is the epitome of the human condition, with most of its residents just doing their best to get through their lives. Mining families struggle against each other. Desperate prostitutes sell sob stories to try to get more money for their drug addiction. The whole town is being taken for a ride by the big three cities of the game, with New Reno having its hooks particularly deep in the casino-toting rundown shithole. And that's the big thing that ties these towns together. While Broken Hills may have not had a jet problem courtesy of New Reno, the ghouls who run the uranium refinery do assure you that their town is struggling to stay afloat as well, and that every bit of refined ore helps. And with the busted air purifier in play, you're also sent to New Reno for parts. Since all roads seem to lead to this bustling epicenter of sleaziness, I think it's about time that we head on over. But since we've been talking about traveling quite a bit now, let's talk about encounters first. So as mentioned before, your encounters are affected by the outdoorsman skill pretty heavily in Fallout 2. If you have a decent chunk of points in it, you can pretty much outright avoid or purposefully enter encounters at will. Basically, you're either getting jumped by whatever's out there, or the game asks, hey, you wanna fight some scorpions? Of course, you can also run into cool shit like merchants, people fighting other people or creatures, caravans, and so on. The devs completely and utterly revamped the encounter system so much that I imagine that I could play this game 10 times over and still not see a good chunk of them. I'm talking 34 different zones, each with their own set of chance encounters. Enemies which range from bandits, slavers, and highwaymen to Enclave, mutant creatures, Wanamingos, and remnants of the Master's army from the previous game. It's an absolute wealth of possibilities, and also includes some random special encounters as well. These encounters occur based on your luck and level, with some only happening at specific levels. What I personally encountered ranged from a Monty Python quiz bridge, to a cafe with fourth wall breaking characters, to King Arthur's knights on a quest for the Holy Hand Grenade, to a reference to an online Fallout fan forum. With the quiz bridge, my character prompts me to save my game in a new slot. The questions that I'm asked involve 2 softball questions and a bit of trivia about the game. The first time I decided to answer correctly, which has the bridge keeper angrily muttering about this job being shitty. I reloaded and answered incorrectly on purpose, only to die instantly. On the third reload, I asked the guy to clarify how many levels of the strong back perk factors into the question that he was asking, which kills him instantly. And finally, I decided to try to attack the bastard, which had him spawning exploding Brahmin and then ending combat repeatedly. I decided to try for a while, and after missing a ton of my shots, I managed to hit him for all 1 of his HP. The cafe was pretty fun in its own right, and basically has several hero models from the first game reliving the type of player that was playing them. It does get a little weird when the black hero model starts complaining about the white people cutting him from the game, and the red-headed female model complaining about having to sleep with the entire dev team in order to make it into the game. But you do get dog meat from the cafe if you strip down to your vault suit. The King Arthur thing is just a big reference to Monty Python, as you might imagine, and not much more happens with it. I gotta say, for as prolific as Monty Python and the Holy Grail was, I think the internet has pretty much all but killed it for me at this point. I know that Fallout 2 came out in 1998, but Jesus Christ, man, it's been non-stop since the goddamn movie came out, basically. Then again, I still laugh at Todd Howard jokes almost all the time, so maybe it just doesn't tickle me the same way it tickles everyone else. The fan forum encounter has a bunch of NPCs named after real-world screen names on a Fallout forum known as Unwashed Village. The forum itself is now defunct, though the site still exists. Regardless, the whole encounter plays out with all of these forum members battling a known spammer at the time who was wreaking havoc on the site. It must have been really damn cool to have stumbled onto this RNG event in Fallout 2 as one of these people. All of these encounters really help to drive home the amount of times that you could reasonably play Fallout 2 and still have a brand new experience each time, which is amazing. I know that a lot of these are just jokes, and maybe that bothers some people. I kinda get it, but at the same time, it's still really fun for me personally. It's just gonna be a preferential thing at the end of the day. But either way, though I only wound up getting about a quarter of them, the rest are all fun in their own right and range from more pop culture references to bizarre Easter eggs that add a little more excitement to braving the wastes. So the city of New Reno is absolutely huge, with plenty to do in a daunting way for first-time players. I remember the first time I pulled up, I felt almost overwhelmed with the amount going on. The big thing that you need to know here, though, is that there are 4 crime bosses which have divided the city and fight each other over the control of it constantly. As such, you can join any one of them as a made man if you decide to go through with all of their quests. This is actually something I'm pretty excited about for this video, seeing as I only ever chose one family to go through with. But I learned later on that you can actually become a made man in every single one of these families if you know when to halt the quest line that you're on and start the next one. But let's start with an overview. Charging into New Reno and parking your car nets you a little attention from a local who has all of the information. There were a couple of notable info dealers in the previous Fallout, but Jules here tops them all in pure personality. The way that he talks is something that I can hear in my head, and the dialogue here is top notch. As such, chatting him up and paying him 400 fun bucks total to spill the details on the 4 families here is always worth it for me. Right out of the gate you have the Mordinos, who used to be slaves before clawing their way to the top. They're the jet dealers here, and they supply the entirety of California more or less with enough drugs to pacify the countryside through their copious amounts of factories. They're always looking to improve their products so that people can fly higher, so to speak. And they hire the brightest scientists in the business to make that happen over in one of their facilities here where they test new batches of jet on slaves. Next we've got the Salvatores, who specialize in firepower, specifically of the energy weapon variety. They're a quiet and serious gang who tend to cut down people just for looking at them funny. Next up are the Bishops, who Jules here has the least to say about. The only thing that he imparts is the knowledge that their leader is particularly protective of his wife and daughter. And finally, there are the Wrights, who are all members of the same bloodline. They deal in alcohol specifically, which is the only thing that Jules really has to say about them. So let's see what's going on around town before starting our gangster extravaganza. Immediately across the street is a whorehouse where you can choose to play with many of the town's ladies. They have Jenga, Yahtzee, Connect 4, Anal, Monopoly, and Hungry Hungry Hippos if I'm reading the menu correctly. All of them increase one of your stats by 1 for a little while, which is nice. Then you've got the Desperado, which is the casino where the Mordinos hang out. The Mordinos Casino, if you will. We'll get back to that one later. For now, heading up north reveals even more city to play around in. You've got the gym with a boxing ring that you can participate in. No armor, fists only, so my stats can only carry me so far in it. Across the way you've got the Golden Globes Porn Studio. It's a studio where films are made of 2 consenting adults practicing their pro wrestling against each other. Okay, YouTube employee? Pro wrestling. Also, you can get paid $5 to wax shafts. Probably the shafts that keep the wrestling ring up, I didn't ask. If you come back later after gaining popularity in town, you can star as one of the wrestlers yourself, but I think you can do it sooner if your charisma is high. Further up the road are 2 more bar/casino mixes. One's ran by the Bishops, called the Shark Club, or the Sark Cub I guess, and the other is the Salvatores, which is run by the Wrights. Wait, no, it's run by the Salvatores. Huh, not what I would have went with. I actually have business at the Shark Club as I wound up snagging a briefcase in Vault City which is to be delivered to the boss here. If you happen to shake down the guy who wanted the case delivered, he slips a note into the briefcase stating that you're a piece of shit, and the Bishops immediately turn on you, which obviously cuts off any jobs that you can do for them. I definitely learned that lesson the hard way before. Fortunately, I prevented that particular outcome this time, but I figured it was time for some payback anyways. So I fucked John Bishop's wife and daughter, who both immediately pull you into bed when you speak with them. What? The guy had it coming, just, in a different timeline. Regardless, John forces you into doing his next job if you threw his daughter around the room like a pinball, so I'll cover the details of that real quick. Basically, he wants a guy who's part of the NCR dead, but he wants it to look like an accident. If you share a bit of pillow talk with Mrs. Bishop, she'll tell you that John's been trying to get in good with the NCR so that he can take advantage of its size and start rigging elections and controlling the drug trafficking there. So the guy that he wants dead is likely someone who's stopping him from getting that done. But we'll continue on that in a few. For now, Salvatore's beckons across the street. It's a bar and, it's just a bar. You can talk to Big Boss Salvatore if you want to, but there's not a lot of superfluous stuff. On the west side is the, bad part of town? I mean, this whole place is an urban nightmare of junkies, prostitutes, and scammers, but this is like the shittier part. There are some shops, one of which nets those mine parts for Broken Hills. The other is the gun store where the guy up front has a low-intelligence fellow locked away in his basement who does all of the gun modifications. Oh yeah, there are gun mods in this game, which is pretty neat. But that's really about it in terms of important shit on the west side. The east side, however, houses the Wright family and is probably the nicest part of town. Well, nicest is relative here, it still looks like this. But the only thing to do here is to interact with the various products of incest known as the Wrights. You can give a pistol to the kids outside and they'll be dead when you come back. And if you want to, you can have them lead you out to the desert to witness a transaction between the Enclave and the Salvatores for energy weapons. Additionally, you can talk to Mrs. Wright, who believes that her husband, the alcohol baron, is working on cleansing the city of corruption while preaching temperance. Obviously, this is just a method to control the people of New Reno, which harkens back to the real-world history of temperance in the United States, which I thought was pretty fun. But that's about it as far as side stuff goes in New Reno beyond collecting cat's paw magazines for the owner of the brothel and recovering your stolen car from the chop shop. So after running back to Broken Hills for Marcus, it's time to really sink our teeth into the families of New Reno. We'll start with the Bishop since I already have an in with them. Now the issue here is that the guy that Bishop wants killed is in the NCR area. Talking about this game in any sort of linear manner is already kind of a bit of a problem, and this is another monkey wrench that's thrown into the mix, even if it stems from something good. So I'll skip over any NCR dealings revolving around the victim here and jump into it in a bit, because there are some things that can be done before putting him out of his misery. After the deed is done, returning to Fuckface Bishop has him wanting you to kill someone else in the NCR, go figure. This time though, it's the vice president of the faction, which makes things a little more interesting than sticking an old man with a poison needle. So we've got a couple of options here. Guns blazing, which, isn't a great idea in the heart of the NCR, or we can go with a more stealthy approach, which has me either gaining the trust of the security here or pickpocketing the president's assistant for a presidential pass. By the way, I still have 20 sneak and 25 steal, and I'm first trying these steals. So again, I don't think these are the best stats to dump points into. After making it into the VP's estate, I can stick him with some super stim packs which will drain his health after a couple of minutes. Or I can go for the tried and true dynamite. So here's the deal. This was the last quest for John Bishop, and normally this is where he'd welcome you into his family. But since I slammed his wife and daughter, he basically forced me to take this first job. And because of that particular interaction, he decides that he no longer has a use for you after assassinating the vice president. So yeah, end of the line no matter how you slice it. Now I know that there's a burning question at the forefront of everyone's mind at the end of the Bishop family sequence. And the answer is yes, you can absolutely continue clapping John Bishop's widow's cheeks after his body hits the floor. In fact, you have to step over it to get to bed, so she seems pretty cool about it, all things considered. Meanwhile, his daughter charged me with a knife, so I guess she wasn't as okay with how things went down. The fight out of this place is fucking brutal though, as we go down 3 floors of fighting. At one point, the prostitutes go berserk, which I can only imagine is a coding error as they just start shanking both Bishop's men and the casino patrons. I mean, nothing can stop these women from descending on their victims besides a bullet to the head or leaving the map, but they're fine after doing so. Well, I mean, depending on your definition of fine. Alright, next family time. The Salvatores were the ones with the energy weapons. Their boss is a decaying old man who speaks to you like Darth Vader through his oxygen tank setup. But the muscle here is the most unbearable piece of shit who treats you like liquid garbage at every given turn. Thank God we're not siding with these fucks. The first mission has you tracking down a guy who cheated at cards. Salvatore wants him dead and his money back, which is pretty easy to accomplish. Having Lloyd here lead you to where he stashed the money has him taking you to Golgotha, which is a very minor area that contains plenty of graves to dig up if you're into that. Otherwise, it's not very important. Still, it's pretty cool to find minor little areas like this in the game though. I feel like it really continues to lend to that idea that this game can be played quite a few times without seeing everything. The next mission is a shakedown of a merchant in town, which isn't anything to write home about but is still pretty fun in its own right. And finally, we get to meet up with the Enclave as one of the Salvatore's guards in the whole energy weapon transaction that we witnessed before. If you move, everyone on the map loses their shit. So you have to just stay still and bathe in the glory of the Enclave or whatever. Though honestly, the dialogue is the exact same as it was the first time that you witnessed the transaction, so yeah. And then that's it for the Salvatores. Well, that sucked. When I played before, I wound up with the Wrights and the Bishops, so I can confidently say that although I had a bit of fun with the first 2 Salvatore missions, they're easily on the weaker end when it comes to questing. At least the fight on the way out goes a lot faster and the prostitutes don't lose their fucking minds this time. Next up are the Mordinos. Big Jesus Mordino is also a decrepit old man, though his health problems seem to stem from obesity rather than old age. His first job is a simple package delivery out to his meth lab called the Stables. This is a simple back and forth, but the Stables are worth exploring a bit for a new potential companion in Myron.
He's
stupid? Jet, motherfucker, Jet! Here talking to its maker, its creator, its god.
Yeah. This dweeb is the creator of Jet, which he's very proud of. In exchange for his cavalcade of drug knowledge, he gets everything that he wants from the Mordinos except for one important thing: respect. Likewise, you can convince the nerd that he'd be better off traveling with you than sticking around in this bunker. I've never liked Myron, even if I do think he's a good inclusion into the game. It's fun to listen to other characters bully him, and he's good for making chems. He also has a mini quest involving tracking down a cure for Jet, though you can also do that one without him. And then we get to the second and final mission for the Mordinos, which again is awful, because it means running over and collecting money from the porn studio. And that's all that happens concerning this quest, but you can at least use this opportunity to pressure the porn man into giving you an audition if he wouldn't give you the time of day before. It doesn't go well because of my 4 endurance, but hey, still neat. There would be one more mission for Big Jesus here, but unfortunately I kind of jumped the gun on the Salvatores, seeing as he wants them dead, and since I killed them already, there's nothing more that I can do, which I think is kind of silly. I would have absolutely loved it if Big Jesus had heard of you making waves and preemptively eliminating his foes, and then actually trusted you with a different job because of this. Hell, maybe if you took out 2 or more of the families he turns on you out of paranoia. But as things stand, this is just a dead end, which blows. And finally, we have the Rites, which I feel have the most fleshed out set of missions, even if there are only technically 2 or 3 if you consider a side quest. The side quest has you talking to Mrs. Wright about the whole temperance thing, and then pointing out to her that her husband is running New Reno's alcohol supply. She vehemently disagrees, stating that her husband dismantled his booze still forever ago, and then she tries to prove it to you. When she meets you at the church the next day, she appears defeated before admitting that it's still up and running. You can go and destroy it yourself or have her do it, which I opt for the latter. The real meat though is talking to Orville Wright, who at first claims that there's no way that he'd let an outsider into his family. But then he thinks about an issue that he's been having, and realizes that he's made no headway with sending his sons in to try to take care of it. The problem is that one of his teenage boys recently died from a jet overdose. He wants me to figure out who could have possibly forced his innocent boy to use the devil's methamphetamine. So I question the big dealers in town, one of which gets pissed and threatens me. For some reason, the guy sees fit to take a knife to someone who's wearing full combat armor, who's wielding a full-auto shotgun and has a super mutant and a Deathclaw as backup. The other 2 point fingers at each other, and I can choose to turn one of them in, or little Jesus Mordino if he was alive. But digging up the Wright son's body reveals traces of poison in his system, and investigating his room has us stumbling upon a poison-laced jet canister. Upon questioning one of the jet merchants, he realizes that the Salvatores ordered up some poison jet, which he provided. Returning to Orville has the man laughing in bitter defeat, seeing as he fears the Salvatores with their laser weaponry. When I state that I wiped the family out, he retorts with the news that the Salvatores are much bigger than the people stationed in New Reno. But he does think up an alternative, which has me stopping by the Sierra Army Depot for more firepower. The depot is as crazy or as tame as you make it, as having good repair and science skills make it a cakewalk. But if you choose to, or if you just don't have the stats, you can fight your way through the extremely heavy robot security. The whole place is a playground of weapons, ammo, and general combat gear. I particularly like the old news broadcast that you can read claiming that the US found a way to tap into the last known supply of oil, which China was unhappy about. With gas prices skyrocketing worldwide, the last bit of oil caused the US economy to flourish, leading to its annexation of a desperate Canada. The US then impeached its president over jaywalking, even though it was obviously because he pushed for annexing Canada. Additionally, temperatures in the winter hit lows of 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Riots took place over oil, which was now more expensive than gold, and China eventually invaded through Alaska before being pushed back and launching the nukes. It's all very, yes, exaggerated, but the hints of real possibility still make this whole thing a fascinating read. But there really isn't a ton of noteworthy things to do here. I mean, yeah, there are fun little distractions and stuff to obtain. You can pick up another companion called Skynet, which is an AI that you can shove into a robo-brain. You can also extract your other companion's brains and shove them into other robo-brains. And then there's this fun little goofy fella who they tried to bring back with experimental metagel, who then melts when he runs away. It's just a circus of shit to loot and tech to explore, and it serves its purpose very well. Of course, Orville is very pleased with your findings and makes you a made man of the right family. This comes with an array of benefits which mostly amount to discounts, but also has everyone in town treating you with a lot more respect. Overall, New Reno is basically New Vegas on meth. It's a scummy, trashy pile of shit in the middle of the map, and the setting is absolutely amazing in its own right. The amount to do, the way that people are, and what you can make of it are all perfect additions to Fallout 2. Now, I'm not saying that it's better than the city of New Vegas. There are better stories, more interesting characters, more intertwining plot lines, and more importance placed on Vegas that blow New Reno out of the water. But there's a certain quality of realism that Reno brings to the table. And honestly, these qualities probably wouldn't be seen in something like Fallout nowadays. Yeah, sure, there are scumbag areas in newer Fallouts, but something about games being fully voiced with 3D models make the sexual encounters and heavy drug use go way down, even if those things could just be implied. So while I do like New Vegas better as a setting, I think that there's a strong case for New Reno's existence as well. Now, all of that praise aside, New Reno does have a lot of issues. The amount to do is staggering, yes. The way that people talk is interesting to read, but a lot of the questing seems more like filler than stuff with actual substance. I think the Salvatores and the Mordinos honestly could have been combined into a better family. There's very little overlap between these families beyond a handful of instances, and that kinda sucks. Additionally, for as good as this game is about there being alternate routes and questing based off of player choice, these gigantic families which all compete for New Reno don't really acknowledge whether or not you're playing nice or playing mean with the other families. Sure, Bishop will get pissed if you're a made man in another family, but he was generally the only one who was super reactive about this kind of thing. I just feel like wiping out an entire family should have made you more noteworthy to the others, and that lack of impact is really felt when you can do pretty much everything. The right's east side of the map is also woefully underutilized in terms of what there is to do in it. I'm not opposed to it existing, I just wish there was a bit more to it, even if I think the right's quests were my favorites. And finally, the amount of little technical problems that arise are at an all-time high in New Reno. People going nuts during fights, Bishop's wife not noting that her husband is dead, a scripting bug which causes your speech stat to flip-flop when trying to get your car back from the shop, the entire town lagging to a point where I have to restart the game, and probably 40 other bugs that hurt the game that all stem from this one area of the map. I know I've been pretty lenient on bugs existing just due to knowing about the development cycle, but it doesn't make this whole ordeal any less of a slog to get through. Either way, let's jump back over to the NCR. So the New California Republic is one of the first and only places that has a very strong tie to Fallout 1. It's kind of crazy actually. All of these places that we've trekked through have had some roots in the first game every here and there with a handful of characters, some factions, and obvious themes. But the NCR is the first place that really built off of an idea from the previous entry. Basically, the devs took a pretty minor character in Shady Sands and had him go on to form the NCR, with his daughter going on to run it after him. But we'll get to her in a moment. For now, the NCR does something that no other place does in this game. It has the player put away their weapons and their companions' weapons if they want to enter the city to do business. It's a little bit annoying mechanically, but it also makes complete sense, and it makes me wonder why Vault City didn't have the same setup. Outside of the walls, a bulletin board reinforces this rule along with prohibiting people from being under the influence of chems or alcohol, the prohibition of prostitution, gambling, and slavery, and a nice little point about ignorance not being an excuse. Interestingly enough though, there are slave pens and a bar situated right outside of the NCR, so apparently that's just an inner city set of rules. You would think that these slave pens in particular would be a no-no, but I guess they only care about it within the perimeter. At least officially. Inside the city's walls, people are generally pretty damn polite. Probably the nicest in terms of what they have to say to you at random. With the town being as big as it is, there's plenty to do here, to a degree where covering everything would get a little bit stale. So let's hit the big events. Round 1 is a bomb threat. Yeah, dude's pissed about his ex-wife taking him for everything that he has after she got caught cheating on him, and he's threatening to blow up the power plant here. You have a couple of options, but I went for the one where I talk him down. Round 2 involves the Rangers, which are a group of charitable do-gooders that work to stop slavers from slaving. Now you see why there's a big fuck-off slave fence right outside of the town, right? Because your first and only test is setting those slaves free. I gotta say, for as good as this game's been about setting up its quest, this is the first one that kinda sticks out as very video gamey just because it's like, the NCR's against slavers, the Rangers are against slavers, and yet here they are not 100 feet from the entrance of the town. Then after you're done freeing the slaves, the ranger in charge goes, "Congrats, you're a ranger!" I don't know, it just seems a little stupid. This actually isn't the only contradictory thing about the NCR's bulletin board though, as there is a bar inside of it also. At first I thought they'd only serve like water or juice or whatever, but no, they serve alcohol. So I guess as long as you don't get drunk at it, or leave drunk, or drink in the streets, then you can consume alcohol. Then again, a lot of these rules seem to be a don't get caught doing this or being stupid kind of thing, considering that one of the first places that you can stumble into has a roulette table in the back behind a sealed door. Round 3 of this carnival is the Church of Hebology, which I talked a bit about in my Fallout 4 DLC video. Basically, the Hebologists are a humorous poke at real-life Scientology, but with some twists that actually affect your stats if you go through any of their programs. In this case, the head church bitch here can stick you with a Zeta scanner to purge the bad vibes and invite the good, which permanently lowers or raises your luck. So yeah, free luck 10 for me. There's not too much involving the Hebologists here, as their main HQ is in San Francisco. Round 4 has me visiting the Weston Ranch, which is owned by the guy who I assassinated for Bishop back in New Reno. So this is where things get really interesting, as Black Isle has created some really cool interactions between the big 3 cities of this game. So obviously they're all kind of fighting back and forth for territory, general population control, and any chunk of power that they can get their hands on. But a lot of it goes much deeper than, hey, we want control of these mines. The biggest example revolves around Weston, who's described by Vault City's first citizen Lynette as the last honest member of the NCR. Basically, those raiders who I had trouble with before had direct ties to John Bishop in New Reno. He hired them to put the pressure onto Vault City, which they were doing before I lit them up. If you decide to raid Bishop's safe after you're done raiding his wife and daughter's holes, you discover that Bishop was actually hired by the NCR to get Vault City to join the Republic. The mercenaries disguised as raiders were his nuclear option when VC declined his offer. Lynette has you cart on back over to the NCR to talk to Weston about this, who has me run a new holotape back to Lynette. Which, yeah, you can describe this as kind of a back and forth quest design, but with the car it's no problem. In fact, I would say that a lot of the quests revolving around these 3 cities was built around the car, and how quickly you can get back and forth between these places. Either way, I still had to kill Weston for Bishop anyway, so that kind of worked out as a 2-for-1 combo when I stuck him with a poison-filled syringe from the doctor in town's cabinet. But the best thing that the NCR has to offer in my eyes is the path to Vault 13, which to be fair is still the same place that it was in the last game, a bit west of what used to be Shady Sands. There are several ways of discovering the place where everything began, and I went with getting the town drunk to tell me about the time that he scribbled a map to Vault 13 on the back of a painting. Obtaining this painting map reveals the vault's location on the overworld map, and beelining it to 13 has you stumbling onto one of the most interesting ideas in all of Fallout to me personally. The devs intentionally made the vault appear empty, but upon opening it up, oh right, I forgot about the twist. Okay, so these guys are intelligent deathclaws which have been experimented on by the Enclave with the FEV in order to create super soldiers akin to super mutants. The ones that were experimented on became so smart that they pretended to be stupid and obedient before making their escape. Since then, they've discovered the vault and have been using its computer's voice activation to keep the place running. They can read, they can write, they can manipulate their vocal cords like a parrot to mimic human speech. Their intelligence ranges from that of a human child to a fully grown smart human adult, and they've chosen to do their best to make a good impact on the world. They accept all into their home, including a mother and her child, a doctor, a technician, a depressed man who they began administering antidepressants to, and someone who actively tried to destroy their egg colony. Even that last one is still around here, and has allowed freedom of movement to anywhere besides the exit. This is a fantastic idea that plays into the creativity of just what Fallout can be. Because yes, of course, super mutants can be monstrous asshole merc types who attack and eat all humans on sight. And yes, Deathclaws can just be big bad enemies. But why not make more out of them? Or at least a handful of them? The possibilities when writing and creating a whole universe are limitless. And confining certain aspects to a box only stifles any new ideas from coming forward. And I'm not saying that these Deathclaws should have went on to become their own nation and have equal footing with humans, because their story is actually more or less wrapped up in this very game if you wind up completing their quest and don't finish the game fast enough. I'd normally put that off until later, but I might as well hit it now. Basically, these guys want you to repair their computer, which has been tampered with. If you're an evil bastard, they won't even let you through the building unless you're dumb, in which case they'll take pity on you. If you patch the computer up, they'll be happy with you and you can grab the Gecko and be on your way. Later on, the Enclave shows up and massacres them, which you can view part of on the recorded video logs of the vault. It's a horribly disheartening death to a morally good people, one who were just trying their best to make it while showing humanity that they weren't the monsters that they appeared to be. And you could view this whole story as a tiny blip on the radar of Fallout lore, right? But the fact that it was presented as a possibility is a gigantic highlight for me, because it opens so many more ideas on what Fallout could be, what it could have. Maybe a couple of these Deathclaws hide and survive the massacre, and they go on to become these jaded haters of humanity. They teach their young to hate humans, but are still able to manipulate humans through written messages or forced coercion. Maybe you as a player in a new Fallout are able to meet these Deathclaws who have strayed from their ancestors' path of peace and can join them to be as mean as they are, or dissuade them from this route, instead showing them that mankind can be good too. The potential for carrying something that stemmed from, well, what if we made intelligent Deathclaws, into future titles is amazing. And while things like this never happened in later games, I still love this scene immensely. As such, my newest companion is a Deathclaw named Goris. Goris is a highly knowledgeable Deathclaw soldier who emphatically wants to learn more about humankind and the outside world. While he doesn't have too much more to say to you beyond that, he does let you know when the Enclave attacks Vault 13, as he has a bit of a telepathic connection to his kin. The only other thing worth mentioning is the fact that every time it's time for combat, my man tosses his robes off in a dramatic fashion before charging the nearest enemy and goring the shit out of them. That's just cool as hell, man. The last real notable thing to do in the good old NCR is speaking to the woman herself, President Tandy. For as much as I like what the devs have done with Shady Sands and the NCR, the amount that Tandy has to say to you is pretty lacking. Sure, she regales the time that she got rescued by the Vault Dweller and fills in the blanks about how the NCR came to be this way, but her personality is just kind of for lack of a better word. She's pleasant enough to speak to, seems to know what she's doing, and answers whatever questions you have to the best of her knowledge. She explains that she doesn't like New Reno, but she's still willing to politely annex the shit out of them if she can. She comments on her dad dying while looking for Vault 13. But the most important knowledge comes in the form of a holodisk of NCR propaganda. And if that's the most important and interesting thing here, it speaks volumes about her character being almost non-existent. The disc itself basically explains the process of how the NCR goes about spreading and claiming new land. A town can apply to be part of the NCR's territory. Then they'll send out their soldiers, clean up the bad stuff, and then the town can apply for full citizenship with voting rights. The president and VP are voted in by the people, though with no term limits, Tandy has been running the place for decades now. So in a way, she might as well be a queen. The whole tape makes the NCR seem like a great place to live and a good faction to be a part of, which makes sense given the disc's nature. The task that Tandy gives you is to head on over to Vault 15, where a group of squatters, as she puts it, have taken over the outside of the vault and aren't letting anyone near it. Arriving on scene has a woman pulling you aside for help finding her daughter, who went missing a little while ago. She claims that the NCR hasn't been helping or hurting these people who are just homeless and trying to survive out here. But then they suddenly became interested in the vault, claiming that it was their people's. The way that these squatters have been driving the NCR soldiers off is by enlisting the help of the raiders known as the Cons, which had a minor role in the last game. Actually, their minor role involved Tandy before too, so it's kind of appropriate. These guys have seemingly treated the squatters well, but it soon becomes apparent that they're using them as a front while they try to tap into the vault. For some reason, as smart as the Cons have been up until this point, they decided to kidnap this woman's kid so that they could have some fun with her, as they put it. Had they just killed her after, there wouldn't be this link to them which exposes their plans to the squatters when I arrive. The squatters decide to give me access to the vault, which I then use to wipe out the cons. Then I convince the squatters that if they let the NCR have this place, that they can broker a deal to be taught how to better survive while being provided with the necessities to live. I'm actually not a big fan of this whole subplot. I do like that the boss Khan's kid went on to lead this group and become a whacked out maniac, but I don't like what's going on with the NCR. Because when you look at what the NCR is like in New Vegas, sure, they're the good guys, but they're extraordinarily inept. That's their flaw. And it makes playing with or against them a lot more fun from a role-playing perspective. Either you're the hero who's helping to clean up their messes, or you're the well-oiled machine who stands in their way despite them being the good guys. In Fallout 2, they're just these messiahs. Everything is good. They're here to create a society where democracy rules and lawbreakers are dealt with. I mean, yeah, they technically hired John Bishop to try to put the pressure on Vault City, but I'm pretty sure they didn't really have any idea about the actual raiders being hired, or even if they did, I don't know, I guess that's the worst thing that they really do here in this game. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with these goals of being good, but it's the flaws that make the NCR interesting to me, and they hardly have any in this game, which makes them a lot more boring. But that's it for the NCR. The main things that this place has going for it are the other places surrounding it, though I guess the whole don't run around with weapons thing is also unique at least. I do like the setup here for the NCR as a faction in New Vegas, but it doesn't do much beyond the setup. The town itself isn't the most fun to explore, the people are pretty boring, and the most fun that I had was when New Reno was involved, which I would count as New Reno questing. It just felt like the devs could have done some more missions with the Rangers, had Tandy have a bit more personality, and maybe made the whole council area of the map feel a lot more important. I'd have loved it if it turned out that Tandy was directly manipulating votes to keep her in charge, or anything to make these guys seem a little more not so goody two-shoes. But I guess it is what it is, and not everything can be perfect. So now that everything is relatively wrapped up regarding the big players of the game, you'll recall that I retrieved the Gecko from Vault 13. Throughout the game, the village shaman has been telepathically speaking to me and updating me on the state of the village, which deteriorates as time goes on. It's very much a product of PC games at the time and serves to basically remind the player that they didn't just get cut loose into a playground to do as they please. But I suppose I never really talked about what was going on with the whole Gecko ordeal. So basically, the Garden of Eden Creation Kit is a device meant to aid in terraforming previously unusable land into something that can grow crops and support life. Each kit contains supplements for planting seeds, stabilizing chemicals, and purifying water, along with a load of helpful information and supplementary technology. Basically, it's an advanced gardening kit. It was instrumental in the construction of Vault City, which emerged from Vault 8, and is revered as an almost magical item by the people of Arroyo, which is why you were sent out to find it. When you ask everyone else out in the wastes who know about it, they're pretty much like, oh, those old things? Oh yeah, they're pretty useful, they're just not really used anymore though. Because their purpose was to basically jumpstart a civilization, which makes the Gecko in Fallout 3 that much more out of place. I know that particular Gecko unit was supposed to be a one-of-a-kind prototype, but the fact that it really is that miracle device that the Arroyo people viewed it as kind of just continues to play into this idea that Bethesda looked at the really big ideas from the first games and just ran with them in any direction that suited their narrative. But either way. After making it back to Arroyo, the town shaman lays on the ground nearly dead. He claims that the Enclave assaulted the town before taking a chunk of it hostage and killing the rest.
Dark souls came. They took everyone. It's a game created by From Software. Some say that video games truly didn't exist until it was bestowed unto the world. You must hurry, Chosen One. Stop Hidetaka Miyazaki from spreading his annualondo to the rest of the world. The fate of video game journalism is at stake.
So there would really only be one more big place left to go that we've been told about, and that's San Francisco. But after the whole Goris fiasco, we can also choose to hit up the military base from the previous game on the way over as well. Now story/lore-wise, this place is decent. Basically, the Enclave had some miners digging down into the old vats of FEV so that they could obtain the shit directly from the source. Eventually, the miners began to change into super mutants, then overwhelmed the Enclave guard before getting shut into the base when the Enclave blew up the entrance. Combat-wise, it's a fuckload of mutants, flamers, plasma throwers, power fists, and save reloaders. That last one might seem unfamiliar to you, but some of these guys had these weapons that just reloaded my save. So weird, right? I mean, it always seemed to happen right after they killed Marcus. I don't know. Maybe it was just a bug. The real reason to come to this place, though, is the power armor. You know, in the last game I had like 5 strength or whatever, and it was fine because I could nab the power armor pretty damn early. In this game, my 5 strength has absolutely crippled me. The amount of times that I could not carry the shit that I wanted was the worst damn thing possible for someone who likes to grab literally everything that they can so that they can sell it later. This is literally the reason why I have 3 companions. They are my mules, and I feel nothing for them beyond a slight fondness like I would a horse. Actually, the horse would be cuter. The power armor was my real friend all along, and I don't care about these stim-pack absorbers anymore. But then again, now I can carry even more loot. Yeah, we'll see. At the bottom of this mini dungeon is a former magician who was kidnapped from Redding by the Enclave and forced to dig. As such, the magician summons his magical animals from the radioactive goo to help him out. But killing him early obviously stops that process. Alright, this was a well worth it distraction, but let's head on over to San Francisco at last. The first thing that you'll notice about the city is that it's a lot cleaner and more put together than its IRL counterpart. I guess the devs assumed that just cramming modern day San Fran into their video game would be confusing. But yeah, this place is great. The music is interesting, the equipment shops are stocked with amazing stuff, and the whole place feels completely different than anywhere else in the game. Though that's definitely due to the chunk of San Francisco that you land in being the Chinatown portion of the city. Or I guess as the game refers to it, She-Town. Of course, with it being the late 90s at the time of development, you gotta have a throwback to martial arts in some form. So there's this fighting ring in the center of this area where the bad boys and the good boys duke it out every day in a bid for control of the town. If your morality is high, you can go train with the good guys. And if it's low, you can train with the bad guys. There is no room for neutrality here. Then you can challenge either to mortal combat with no armor or weapons, and that's it. Just a little diversion, I guess, though not an unwelcome one. The more important bit is the Brotherhood of Steel bunker in the bottom left corner. These bunkers have been continually popping up in a couple of areas in the wasteland, but you're never able to get into them since the guard outside, who seems to have been watching you, directs you to back away when you attempt it, as mentioned before. And guess what? You're still not allowed to go in. But the guy will actually talk to you now that you've made it this far. I know it's weird, but let's finally talk about what happened with the Brotherhood of Steel after they seemed to be such a well-oiled and bureaucratic machine in the first game. I'll try to sum this up as basically as possible. So at the end of Fallout, the Brotherhood was chilling and just doing their thing. They were collecting weapons and handing them out to people that they felt had the same type of moral code that they had, and they felt pretty comfortable doing it. Eventually they kind of figured, hey, you know what? We're fucking Chads, no one's gonna challenge us. We're literally the best. We got this down. We're the kings of the tech kingdom. Yeah, and then the Enclave flew in with 40 flying machines that they had never seen before. At this stage, the Brotherhood had gotten a lot more lax and understaffed. Seeing the Enclave show up like the big kids at the sandbox scared the hell out of them. So they did what any anal retentive nerd would do. They hid. They hid and watched and tried their best to look inconspicuous. One person at an outpost in the middle of a random town, who cares? And that's been their philosophy. They don't know how to deal with the Enclave if they attempt to invade in their vertibirds, especially since they seem to have no qualms about killing, dealing drugs, and claiming slaves to get their jobs done. They are quite literally the more evil and more powerful form of the Brotherhood. And again, if you look at what the Brotherhood is in Fallout 1 and 2, there's an absolute night and day difference between Black Isle Brotherhood and Bethesda Brotherhood. Hell, even New Vegas had the Brotherhood kind of following the original plan of being a shell of its former self. Sure, they're more or less one of the good factions in this hellscape, but they're overly analytical, overly controlling, and they're always the underdog. Sure, they have power, but they're not this sweeping, ridiculous, blimp-riding force of destruction. They're just doing their best to follow their code and make the wasteland a better place. And it's really never working out the way that they hope until one lone man comes in to push their agenda in the right direction. I honestly think that this is the better way for the Brotherhood, and I know that that's a preference. Some people are gonna love the mighty and in-your-face direction that the East Coast Brotherhood went, but I personally feel more inclined to help the down but not out form of the Brotherhood, to help them pick things up and fight the good fight against seemingly insurmountable odds. When I come into the East Coast Brotherhood and go, yeah, I wanna help you, and they go, hey, fuck you, we got this. We're badasses and we know what we're doing. We're gonna seize all the tech, destroy all the synths, and fuck your wife's boyfriend before lunch. I just feel like I'm choosing them because, ooh, big shiny armor. I want to help out Leonidas' 300 Spartans. I don't want to help out the crypto bros to snatch up more NFTs. Either way, these guys want you to infiltrate a new Enclave base up north and attempt to gather any information that you can. That'll be our next stop after we're done with San Francisco. The other way out of here takes us to the end of the game, which we'll get to later, obviously. For now, there's the two main factions of the city, the Shi and the Habologists. The Shi operate to the east, and seem to be researching all sorts of theoretical ideas such as the replication of the vertibird, the use of polymers to create fuel, and the creation of new armor and weaponry. As such, the assistant to the Emperor in the so-called Steel Palace wants you to obtain the plans for the creation of a vertibird from the same base that the Brotherhood wants you to head to. If you do this, the assistant plans on letting you meet the Emperor to ask about your loved one's location. Or you could just walk past him, discover that the Shi Emperor is a computer, hack into it, and figure out these things for yourself. You can also format its hard drive, which the guard who just let you waltz in suddenly gives a shit about. The Habologists, on the other hand, have themselves set up in an underground bunker with a makeshift space shuttle outside of it. The devs went hard on Scientology, basically mocking it non-stop, which is pretty damn bold all things considered. They had their own versions of Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman who emphatically preached about Habology and how giving money to the church made them happier people. There's non-stop buzz about them being real-life celebrities. And I gotta say, the balls on both Black Isle and Interplay here are pretty damn massive. I gotta imagine that if the gaming industry had been a lot bigger when this game released and everyone was talking about it, there probably would have been some ramifications here. At any rate, you can join up with these guys and basically push the third, more neutral party in town towards siding with them. You can also do pretty much everything that you could for the Shi, but for them. Getting them the vertibird plans, reformatting their drives, redirecting the fuel to them, all that shit. It unfortunately feels like this whole place was kind of a quick, make two opposing factions sort of deal. And while the themes involved on each end are fun, San Francisco ultimately falls flat for me. I won't really cover too much more of it because of that. I guess it's just good to point out that for as many good to great locations that there are in Fallout 2, with really well thought out factions, San Francisco really doesn't follow along those lines too well. So let's cut over to the Enclave base known as Navarro, and we'll loop back to San Fran and clean up the notable leftover stuff. Alright, so as always we have a couple of methods of infiltration. And as always, these methods encompass the guns blazing fuck everything up route, or the more nuanced approach which involves leaving your companions behind and acting like a new recruit for the Enclave. Since obviously the second one is always going to be more fun, we'll go with that. The first thing that you're told to do is to go report to the drill sergeant that's around here. But what they really mean here is go do whatever the fuck you want. I actually find this to be a mixture of fun and kind of immersion breaking. Like yeah, it's fun to goof off, to run around the base and to talk to people. But you arrived at this car chop shop type of place which was a front for the real base that was located in the back. You have to get a password from the guy out front who's keeping watch while pretending that he doesn't know about Navarro. Then you have to leave your crew behind because they don't want a posse of random people rumbling into the base. But then when you actually get there, you can just run around, get yourself equipped in Enclave power armor, run back out, give your old armor to Cassidy, run back in, gossip with the cook about who's doing what around here, ask the mechanic about the vertibird plans with zero suspicion cast your way, etc, etc, etc. It's just kind of silly after all of this bullshit that's required to get in. I almost would have rather there been a sort of montage where you can talk your way into getting what you want, or sneak around, or utilize your repair knowledge or so on during a series of cutscenes where you're infiltrating as an Enclave recruit. As things stand, the whole thing makes the Enclave look pretty inept. Though then again, no one's been stupid or brave enough to try what I'm trying, so I guess you could just call this a learning experience for these guys. The end result here has me walking out with a load of new gear, the vertibird schematics, the key to get the old tanker working in the San Francisco Bay, and a new robo-dog companion. Again, I just walked in as a new recruit, started asking questions and telling people random lies, and no one even looked at me funny for asking such obvious things, which definitely paints the Enclave here in a light of incompetence. So wrapping things up has us driving back to San Francisco and dropping off the things that we just collected. The Brotherhood is kind enough to merely copy the vertibird plans and let you keep the originals to give to either of the two groups here, which is kind of weird when you think about the doctrine that the Brotherhood is built around. You know, the whole hoarding tech and doling it out to those who they think deserve it thing. Then again, maybe they just trust my judgment at this stage. Still, this is the largest source of stat increases in the game, as the bunker that you now have access to has an AI which will upgrade your strength, int, perception, and charisma by 1 point each if you have the corresponding memory modules to do so. This is actually something that Fallout 2 does that's really cool. Sure, not everything has a purpose, but sometimes you'll just stumble upon a random piece of technology like these modules and go, I don't know what this is for. And if you're trained in the classical Bethesda style of looting, you just kinda leave it there because it's junk. But if you manage to gather up these pieces of Exodia and hold on to them until this stage, you get rewarded big time for it. I mean, look at these fucking stats. Sure, I got 2 luck and 1 int from the Hubologists and their rituals, but this is a fucking character sheet and a half. I feel like this glorious god for the first time in this game, and that didn't happen until the last couple of hours of gameplay. Before this, I mean, sure, yeah, I could take care of myself, but nearly any fight with competent foes was a potential death sentence. This game is a hell of a lot more balanced than the last, and it feels very appropriate to become this powerful when I'm about to take on the Enclave. I might as well note this now because I don't really know where else to say it, but I did leave Goris here because, he got bugged after my Hubologist initiation. Basically, everyone got booted from my party, and although I could pick up Marcus and Cass again, Goris wouldn't speak to me at all. I left him in San Fran with the hopes that he would figure it out, but nothing really seemed to work. So yeah, it kind of sucks, but he was also the weakest link in my party, I guess. Speaking of bugs, man, there is a lot here going on that should not be, and it's kind of unfortunate. I actually didn't have most of these issues the first times that I played, so it's just my luck for them to be happening now. Basically, I joined the Hubologists, then ran over to the She and gave them the vertibird plans. Now you can play both sides here for a bit if you want, basically doing all of the little tasks that each side requires before pulling the trigger on the final decision. In this case, I could go murder the Hubologist leader for the She, or I could flip over to the Hub side by killing the She leader and taking back the vertibird plans. This works both ways, but neither really matter in terms of hitting the endgame stuff. Basically, we need to hit up this third neutral party, who are all hanging out on the ship at the docks. If you know what you're doing, you can handle all of this yourself, but you can also milk some more XP for some final levels before attacking the Enclave. One of these things involves getting back someone's spleen after they bet it during a card game with the She. You can figure out who has it, then you have to find the doctor in town to get it back into the guy. I do all of this, but the doctor won't talk to me because I'm with the Hubologists. So I decide to go full scorched earth with the Hub. I kill their leader and then I report back to the She leader. After all of this, I go back to the doctor who still insists that I'm a Hubologist. When looking up a way around this, supposedly you can head over to Doc Holliday in Broken Hills and have him do the job. But he doesn't have any dialogue regarding Spleenless Joe over here. So yeah, the whole quest fails because the guy dies without his spleen after a couple of days. It just feels like I'm navigating an unfinished game at this stage, which again is a lot more frustrating when I've done a lot of this stuff with minimal issue before. Either way, I insert the key into the ship, install the navcom parts, and get this guy to redirect the fuel from the She over to the ship, and we are officially good to go at last. Overall, San Francisco is pretty underwhelming like I said, even if I do like the looks and feel of the place. It just seems like the devs had a very basic outline and didn't have enough time to expand on it. I would have loved it if something a little more intricate was going on though. Like imagine if you got the vertibird plans over to the Brotherhood member out in She-Town, and then he radios it in and they respond to you and tell you that it's time to initiate phase 2 of their plan. And what happens is that inside each bunker is a swarm of Brotherhood people ready to go. They have connections, volunteers, and just people that they've been slowly bringing into their fold ever since the Enclave made an appearance. And now they want your help to straight up replace a faction in San Francisco. You'd have to go into the She base or the Hebologist base, get crucial information, and take it back to the Brotherhood. Then you get to work figuring out how to replace key members of either side with Brotherhood members. You pay off those who would notice, or take care of them however you want, though the Brotherhood will react differently depending on how you do it. Then eventually you have an entire faction that's replaced. With access to the tech that either side had, the Brotherhood can now begin using all of the knowledge that you gathered to initiate Phase 3, which involves manufacturing vertibirds and weaponry that combines the info that you obtained with the flavor of the side that you replaced. The Hebologist side would have spacey, sci-fi looking armor, weapons, and vertibirds, and the She side would have more traditional Asian-inspired designs. And the thing is, I know that I said that I like the Brotherhood being underdogs that kind of, you work for them and they're not really a huge impact on the endgame. But I do think that even this wouldn't have them being a huge part of the endgame. It's just an optional thing that you can do, a little reinforcement, not the main assault. And again, I do realize that something like this would have taken a lot more manpower and/or time. So this idea is more for fun than wholesale criticism. But I guess it's just a shame that a few of the ideas in Fallout 2 were condensed to a point where there just was no room for expanding on them. Before proceeding with the endgame stuff, I'll note that I did skip over quite a lot of little things in Fallout 2. And I'm not going to go back to cover them, though I will take a brief moment to cover the companions that I missed out on or just didn't pick up. Modoc has 2 potential allies in Miria and Davin. They're absolutely nothing special as far as allies go, and they both required a charisma and/or gender that I didn't have. Lenny, on the other hand, is one of the ghouls over in Gecko, who's a decent doctor and has some fun interactions with a couple of ghouls in the game. I've had him along for the ride before, but he never makes the final cut in my party. And finally, there's the other Robo-Dog, which you can snag from a doctor in the NCR if you feel inclined. Nothing special there, it just kind of exists, as do the other 3 dog companions that you can pick up. So that's, 14 total permanent companions? And out of those 14, I'd say that 6 of them added anything of substance. And even most of those 6 severely lack in the dialogue and personality department after they tell you their stories. There's definitely a quantity versus quality thing going on here with Fallout 2's companions, which is unfortunate because the later entries actually tended to do them a lot better while also being fully voiced. Regardless, after my upgrade montage, I do have one more companion slot raring to go since Goris has lost his mind. And while I could grab dog meat, I do have this extra suit of power armor just lying around.
So, you finally came around, huh? I knew you would. You need me.
Oh, and also, I guess since I don't quite know where to fit this thought, now that I'm at the end of the game, it's become painfully obvious from looking at my inventory that there is a severe lack of radiation in Fallout 2. And that's actually not a complaint. All things considered, it does seem like the devs were going for the idea that radiation naturally decays over time and that areas of the map like the glow were freak anomalies. They didn't make a glow 2 glow harder because it's been 80 years now, and what would be the point of it? The only time that you'll ever encounter severe radiation is from radioactive barrels of goop which have spilled, or creatures that have been altered to become more radioactive in nature. And again, that's fine by me. But I do think that Rad-X and Radaway should have been a lot harder to come by just given the rarity of encountering radiation. I mean, I used I think 1 or 2 packs of Radaway and no Rad-X the entire game. And seeing that I have this big of a stockpile, I think that having every doctor carry around some form of these two seems a little silly given the lessened amount of the stuff. And now it's finally time to hit the Enclave, which starts off with one of my favorite scenes from these older Fallout games. I know it's not really anything that special, truth be told, but you can tell that a lot of love went into it, and the music as always is spot on. So here's the deal. Same as before, you can just wander around this place without a care if you're alone. But I now have 4 companions with me, so yeah. Either you go in and kick ass all the way to the bank, or you goof off. This place is absolutely massive and crawling with Enclave soldiers in power armor. Alongside them are people in vault suits which seem to be living their best lives while spouting off about how great America is. To lift the veil for those who don't know, the Enclave are the remnants of the United States. This was revealed a couple of times by a few people in the wasteland, but it does explain the Enclave's sudden appearance and overwhelming power. Down below you'll find your people who are locked behind glowing cell walls. Of course, if the cell wall power were to be cut, well, yeah, now you've just got a hole in the wall. I never really understood the logistics of that. Reinforced metal door? No way. What if they just pry it open with their hands? Gotta go for those glowing light walls. Now that's futuristic. Underneath this area is the way to the presidential zone of the Enclave. Here you have to fiddle with some terminals to open doors at seemingly random. This always seemed more daunting than it is, though the floor being electrified kind of amps up the danger. If you managed to get all the way here and decided to not lug around the Gecko with you, then congratulations, you fucking moron. Go back to the start. Nah, the devs thought of this and placed a couple around the base, including right around where you're at when the message pops up. You can also nab the best armor in the game in one of these side rooms, so it's worth the diversion. And now we meet the Vice President. He's a nut job with nothing of note to say. And now we meet the President. He's also a nut job, but, well, he's got a lot to say. So the goal of the Enclave is the polar opposite of the Master in Fallout 1. Whereas the Master wanted to perfect humanity by mutating them, the Enclave wants to eradicate every mutant everywhere. Now, if the ghouls and super mutants hadn't ingratiated themselves into society, maybe this would be a good thing. But then the President here goes even further. He claims that any human with any sort of minor mutation would also be killed by the FEV that they've modified to eradicate any organic with this sort of change in their body. But wait, there's more. So obviously if the Enclave is recruiting, then most people that they've been taking in have some sort of mutation, judging by how frequently this kind of thing occurs. I mean, even your tribesmen in Arroyo have it. So how would that pan out? Well, the Enclave have cooked up a way to inoculate themselves from the modified FEV, meaning that they could basically vaccinate all the people that they care about and then just wholesale wipe out the rest of all life everywhere by releasing copious amounts of modified FEV into the world's water supply. Wonderful.
Once again, America will be the world's policeman.
The last thing of note that the President has to say here before you can grab his leg and use him like a baseball bat is something that later Fallouts took very heavy inspiration from. And this is actually a good thing because I've always loved this plot point. He reveals the experimentation that went on in Vault-Tec vaults. And while he only mentions a few examples such as vaults without enough food, vaults with only men, and ones which automatically opened after 6 months, this explanation did lead to some of my favorite ideas out of Bethesda and Obsidian later on. He explains the process as a test to see what humanity was capable of, a grand experiment as he puts it. Ironically, Vault 13 was a control vault that had nothing wrong with it, so the fact that its water chip failed was something that was unplanned, though the President does seem happy and self-righteous about the results regardless. You really only have one course of action here, as the game steers you very directly into dialogue which ends with the President's death. It's a bit of a drop from the options that you had with the Master, though to be fair, the President is only a stepping stone to the meanest motherfucker around. But we'll get to him in a very brief moment. Before we leave this area, we can speak to one more important person, a scientist who wholeheartedly believes that what he's doing is best for humanity. If your speech is good enough, you can basically get the guy to chat to you about the idea of the Enclave using the ultimate example of social Darwinism. When you remind him that humans grew, evolved, and came to thrive based off of the exact same tenacity that they're exhibiting now by taking on these mutations and rolling with the punches, he comes to terms with his own blindness. After swallowing his hubris, he realizes that the only thing that's going to stop the Enclave is to permanently destroy it with no way of coming back. With no way of coming back. To aid in this endeavor, the man releases the vaccine into the cells of your loved ones, vaccinates you, and then pulls the switch to release the FEV into the base. If you wait about 10 minutes or so, everyone not in power armor just fucking melts, which looks awesome. Onward to Phase 2 of Operation Kill the Enclave. At this stage, posted soldiers on this floor are fighting back, though I could have avoided this with the super stim-pack assassination routine. Of course, this fighting doesn't extend to any other area, so whatever, I guess. In the back area behind the President's chambers is our ticking time bomb of the game. If you hadn't released the gas, you could get the guy in the back to shut down the generator, but you could also just drop a load of plastic explosives to get it to begin its meltdown counter. In a familiar but different scene, we run our asses out of Dodge into the biggest baddie in the whole game. Built like a brick shithouse, large as a barge, Frank fucking Horrigan is standing guard, ready to insert his hand up to the elbow into your asshole. This is the Enclave's secret weapon, the agent that was assigned to the protection of the president. Well, that one didn't go very well. But you know, he's big, and he talks like this.
Me, Frank Horrigan, that's who. United States Secret Service. You aren't going anywhere from here.
So he's pretty cool. But yeah, in terms of what the player actually knows about him at this stage, well, he's kind of a random inclusion. I mean, sure, you see him once or twice just blasting holes into anything deemed a mutant, but he's just this roving, chaotic hunk of junk, and a lot less impressive from a lore point of view than, say, the Master. Still, you gotta respect that mass, as the guy's been experimented on so many times after coming into contact with the FEB that his own people view him as a freak. So how do you deal with a room full of turrets and a man liable to rip you in half and swallow the two halves? Well, you go talk to his men outside of the room and you say, hey, you wanna live? It doesn't always work, but when it does, they prove to be a lot more useful than your companions. Yeah, I'm gonna put this one gently. Your companions fucking suck. I mean, yeah, great for early to mid-game, but there's a point where you just find yourself in the middle of a base of soldiers that have the power of freedom and mom's apple pie, and you're staring down an abomination of a man so fucking girthy that you can feel his gravitational pull sucking you in, and your companions just can't stack up to that. So yeah, the Robodog dies, Marcus dies, Cassidy dies, and Super Chad Myron dies. In that order. But hey, the Clave soldiers are here to clean up shop. After magically separating his legs from his body, this unit of matter gives us one last hoorah before his head blows clean off in a confetti paste that can only be replicated with Halo's grunt birthday party skull. And then, well, that's it. The ensuing cutscene shows off a mushroom cloud that only 1998 could bring us, followed by everyone's favorite Aftermath slideshow. The main points are as follows. Your village merges with the remnants of Vault 13, bringing the related families back together so that they can incest out some new heroes into the wastes. They build a sizable city with the Gecko, and live happily ever after. Vault City tried to expand, failed at it due to their isolationism, enslaved the ghouls and Gecko because I optimized their power plant, and then they kinda just withered after that. Bishop's wife popped out my kid from her hole, and that kid went on to run the Bishop family and rule New Reno. Huh, didn't see that one coming. I mean, I kinda just killed everyone there besides the wife, but hey, I guess he was pretty successful regardless. The NCR just annexed the shit out of everything around them. They swallowed a load of small to medium-sized towns and they just succeeded. Broken Hills died off after running out of uranium, Modoc flourished with the help of the Ghost Farm, and the Den flourished without slavers. And finally, my favorite of these actually comes from San Francisco. With the She running the place, they transformed it into an empire of steel and flowers, which I would have loved to see in later installations to some caliber. I mean, yeah, they're as West can be, but so was the Enclave and the Brotherhood of Steel, so I mean, fuck it, right? When the credits roll around, there's a bit of an addition right at the start that made me laugh my ass off. So basically later on, when Fallout 1 and 2 were re-released digitally, a lot of work had been put in by some modders to make the game function a lot more fluidly, especially on newer machines. They added some graphical overhauls, made the game playable in windowed and 32-bit color mode, allowed for the mouse wheel to be used in inventory, fixed some perks and script limitations, and so on and so on and so forth. Well, Interplay, and by extension Bethesda, decided to take these mods without credit, without payment, and without permission. They then repackaged these games and sold them with the improvements included. So the mod developers decided fuck that shit, and included their own credits right at the start of the game, which is amazing. Fallout 2 is an absolute achievement in gaming. And I'll spare myself the effort of trying to work in this question like it's up for debate. Yes, the game is absolutely as good as I remember. The game is a beacon of amazing player choice, endless replayability, and good writing, all packaged into a game that paved the way for all of the fun ideas that you've seen in any of the more recent titles. The good wholly outweighs the bad to a staggering degree, even with all of the bugs and errors. This game is an institution to what games could be, to what could be accomplished and pushed out in less than a year's time. And it's difficult to raise any grievances about Fallout 2, even if some of it is valid. I think the hardest thing to complain about with older games is the lack of quality of life features. I mean, you're launching a game that's a couple of decades old that had the budget of a jar of pickles and a handful of Dunkin' Donuts gift cards. And a lot of the time, I didn't even expect some of these features that were in the game. I played nearly the entire fucking game for the third time, and I'm sitting here in the military base watching 50 giant green men move at the speed of 2 snails pushing 3 snails when it finally clicked that maybe there was a combat speed option. I know that was due to the modders doing their best to keep this game around, but I didn't expect it because this was an older PC game experience for a lot of the 90s. Regardless, after playing more modern games, it's really hard to let some of the stuff that Fallout 2 does slide. Yes, the companion system has gotten a complete overhaul, but there's still no fine-tuning of their behavior. Yeah, you can tell them to go hide if they have the personality for it, but even if you give them relatively normal combat instructions with the commands to heal when low and whatnot, they'll still charge headfirst into a fight, get their asses kicked, and then run and hide in a corner without healing themselves even if they do have stim packs. You almost always have to heal them or they'll just die. Even when you tell them to heal themselves, they won't. It's like they were programmed to only use 2 stim packs at most and then to just dig their own grave after. And healing them wouldn't be the biggest deal if you didn't have to administer literally 1 stim pack at a time. I mean, it makes sense for combat, right? But outside of it, come on. And if you queue up another heal too quickly, your guy won't register the command. So it's heal, wait, all the way from 20 health up to 160. Inventory management with companions is also just a gigantic slog of opening dialogue, hitting trade, and repeating it for every bit of ammo that you want to give them or gun that you want to keep for later. I just wish they had thought up an auto-loot system for companions, with choices on what they should always and never grab from bodies. Additionally, companions in this game are lacking. I don't mean in number, I mean in personality. Yes, I love Marcus and Goris, but that love comes from what they are, not who they are. You don't get any opportunities to sit down and talk to your followers, to learn about who they are and do quests for them. And this is definitely more of an issue because of what later games in this genre have done for companionship. It's hard to look at a game that came out 24 years ago and get upset that it doesn't have long, drawn-out conversations about what makes a specific companion tick. And likewise, I'm not that upset about it. I just don't care about potential companions as much as I hope that I would. That said, the game does do a lot better than its predecessor, so at least there's that. I will say that the sheer amount of bars in every town does get old after a while. I mean, don't get me wrong, it does make sense given the environment, but you start to expect it every time that you waltz into a brand new town, and it makes chilling at a bar a lot less immersive or special. Casinos weren't far behind, of course, but those were at least spaced out a bit more. It almost feels like places like Modoc, Gecko, or maybe Klamath could have gone a different route. I get that you want your quest hub, right? But why not spruce it up with more places like diners, motels, old prison cafeterias, art galleries, theaters, barbershops, playgrounds, and so on? When I saw Gecko introduce tragic cards, I kind of hoped to see a hobby shop pop up somewhere down the line where people hung out. Though maybe the devs didn't want to push their luck with Wizards of the Coast. Again, the bars make complete sense as an established building in each town, but it's just not always the most fun to go to a bar for info. This complaint is going to sound a little weird since it's the first time that I really mentioned it, but it's become pretty clear at the end of the game that Fallout 2's locations lack a lot of cohesion to tie them together. Yes, there are some great allusions towards what the big 3 cities try to do to get at each other, particularly in the new Reno quests for Bishop. Vault City has some connections and commentary directed towards the NCR, and the NCR will talk about the territory that it wants to expand into. Redding and Broken Hills are also definitely affected by these cities, but it really feels like the idea was only planted, but never really expanded on in a significant way. Each of the towns in this game adds something to it, and they feel very Fallout-ish, but they also feel more isolated from each other than connected by the end of the game. I would have loved to be able to bury or to elevate the mining towns by getting them to side with a certain city. It would have been really cool to see the player get to choose one of the cities to join, and then to help it to get a leg up over the others. And while these adjustments weren't needed to make the game good, they definitely would have made it better. But the biggest thing that Fallout 2 did wrong was what it actually did right. The world of Fallout 2 is absolutely packed with great new ideas. Fun factions, great interactions, player choice, sheer possibilities, the treatment of non-human species, and so on. It's absurd how many fantastic choices that the devs made when building up this game, and the vision that they presented for this universe. So how is it wrong? Well, it's not. But when you look at just how many of these really fun and inventive ideas were absolutely trampled into the ground by Bethesda's vanilla take on Fallout, it hurts that much more. I know I've historically had my share of issues with the direction that Bethesda has taken this franchise, but I had forgotten how badly it hurt until I replayed this game again. There's a reason why the Fallout community is split, and of course I still enjoy Fallout 3. Of course I can still have a great deal of fun in 4. But the absolute lack of creative stimulation that these games bring to the table by comparison to 2 is night and day. I can't help but to lament the nearly complete loss of artistry and inspiration that Black Isle seemed to pump out at nearly all times when thinking forward to what Fallout became. But let's try to jump back to some positivity.
You're talking a long time ago. The world's moved on.
The best thing that Fallout 2 does for me is the complete change in how the game can be experienced based off of your choices. The way that its narrative shifts based off of how you treat others. The way that it can be replayed with a completely new build and attitude. There are so many instances where you treating others like shit comes back to haunt you later. Where stuff like you becoming a slaver or a child killer sticks to your reputation in a way that you can't shake. That one thing that I mentioned in New Reno about blackmailing the suitcase guy and having that come back around to you is just one of many differences that can stem from decision to decision. In fact, as another example, if you happen to be screwing around with Bishop's wife and kid, and you keep going up to throw their asses in a circle, he'll eventually begin getting more and more upset if you haven't done the job that you promised that you'd do for him. After enough of this, he'll just have his men attack you for not getting the thing done. Treatment of other people in RPGs is something that's more of an afterthought nowadays than a focus. Yeah, sure, there might be the occasional dialogue in a modern AAA game where if you tell the person that you ripped their son's dick off, they'll attack you or refuse to give you a quest. But for the most part, you can just be an asshole and accomplish nearly anything in the game because the fear of missing out has been deemed as bad by developers. So having this nearly 25-year-old game include all of these finer details about treating NPCs like actual human beings just goes to show that a lot of these writing choices are a relic to many developers today. But beyond this, Fallout 2 does something with evil playthroughs specifically that I haven't really seen often since. I know I didn't really touch too much on this because I did the good boy playthrough as I usually do because it helps me to experience more of the game, but the evil actions that you can perform are a cut above what a lot of modern RPGs tend to let you do. The issue is that there are generally two things that a lot of games tend to rely on to convey evil choices. One, you go to the evil guild people where they have an evil quest for you. You do the evil thing and then you gain evil points. Or two, you have some dialogue with a good or neutral person and they go, "Hey, my son's starving, can you help?" And you get the option to tell them that you hope their son dies. Yes, of course, you can also generally steal shit or kill people or whatever. But when the game presents specific evil choices, you're almost always treated as a conduit for the evil actions of others. Yes, you're the one performing the action, but Mr. Gregg of the Bad Boy Mercenary Battalion is the one telling you to do them. There were a slew of points in Fallout 2 where I could just choose to tamper with shit that would obviously lead to chaotically evil results. And when you do choose to do something like that, the world fights back. A town turns on you. You cut off potential rewards, whole swaths of quest lines, and content in the game because you chose to play as a horrible human, and you are punished for that choice. That kind of possibility lends to so much more realism to the potential scum that I can choose my character to be. And it's options like these that really give the world of Fallout more depth which a lot of games lack. There's also a lot to be said about just which direction that Black Isle thought that the world of Fallout should take, and they stuck to that vision. The smaller and underdeveloped maps became more bustling, more clean. There were these 3 massive hubs which all had equal importance, and they were all developed in their own direction. You had New Reno on one end, with its bright lights, sleazy denizens, and crime-ridden nature. You had Vault City, which was isolated, kept out certain elements, and ran like a well-oiled machine. And in the middle of these two, you had this town that dragged itself up from these small huts into the massive force that it became. And sure, there were still these little small shanty towns and their bars and people just trying to get by, but there were also these towns that had it all together and just weren't as big of players in San Francisco and Broken Hills. And all of these areas had their themes, their factions, and their problems. Humans trying to kill off mutants. mining companies vying for superiority, slavers seizing control of a town, ghouls keeping one of the big players running with nothing to show. These interactions breathed a new life into the wasteland and kept it from stagnating. From becoming small town with rundown people after small town with raiders. Super mutants fell in with society, feral ghouls were much less common, and there were even a slew of intelligent deathclaws which tried to cling to life. Fallout was moving in a direction that has only really been seen in New Vegas since. Again, I love Fallout 3, but the town variety consists of shit town with bomb in it, a slew of rundown dilapidated buildings with super mutants in them, and then a couple of decently fun ideas in Rivet City, Tenpenny Tower, and Little Lamplight. With Fallout 2, I could look at any of the towns in the game and immediately point out what it is, who inhabits it, and what the big problem is. And yes, of course, I just replayed it. But I could name most of the stuff that was going on with them before I started this video. These places weren't making progress rebuilding in 3. They were still struggling 200 years after the bombs dropped. There weren't other well-established factions, there was just the Brotherhood and the Enclave for some reason, and everything else was the Wild West between those two, or the Wild East, whatever. Fallout 4 did a little better with the implementation of new factions, but the Commonwealth was a shit show of people that were still trying to figure things out, with a handful of locations and factions that were ahead of the curve. If you're gonna make these people still at the point of trying to set roots, I think you need to go back in time to make it make more sense. But my point isn't to say this game good, this game bad. It's to point out what I liked most about 2 that I wish that I saw more of in these later games. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom to be siphoned from the original developers. You can still make the new games appeal to a broader audience, with a lot of the more prominent themes being front and center. There's nothing wrong with that, and I personally love collecting Caps' currency, seeing the Brotherhood still kicking around and fighting the iconic monsters from the older games. But with a little more nuance in your storytelling, and a little more direction in your setting, you could easily take the best of both worlds and make something really damn special. Thanks for watching. I would say that I'm done with these games, but I guess, Fallout Tactics is a thing? And, the other one? Oh, and the MMO? Well, shit. I'm done with the main series games. For now, at least. Either way, I'll be moving on and trying to cook up something spooky for October. Until then, I've got merch over at my new and improved shiny merch shop. We got mugs, we got shirts, we got stickers. That's it. Just those 3. The shirts come in more than just t-shirts. I mean, what more would you need, right? I've also got a Twitch where I stream nearly every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. I've got a Twitter where most of the time, nothing. But sometimes, oh baby. I've got a Discord where everyone just kinda talks about shit and it's just general chaos, but you know, the good kind. And I've got a Patreon. And that's it. Have a good one.